we've looked at the CCP and the Chinese Communist Party and just said, yeah, you guys seem to know how to do totalitarianism. Let's take a leaf out of your playbook. From my perspective, there are just unmistakable dots phenomena happening across the world that you can kind of point towards and say, this is, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, take this vaccine or I'll kill you, I wouldn't take it.
I disagree with this calling it psychopathic. I feel like, and I run into this so much with people in these arguments, it feels like you only look at empathy on one side of things. I guess it's just, that's what I don't understand.
I've got empathy for every disgusting human being in the world.
Well, how you doing? How's it going?
Yeah, it's good. I don't know if you remember, we spoke a few years ago.
Well, I see that now on my Discord, yeah. I did remember that.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what we spoke about, but yeah, how have you been since then? The last time I saw you, you were streaming politics, playing games, and you just struggled with a really hard psychedelic experience, and you were looking for a therapist for it.
I'm doing great. Never found a therapist, but everything is a-okay now.
Nice. I just told this story about my first ayahuasca experience on stream, and it kicked my ass into a year-long depression.
Yeah, I mean, ayahuasca seems like a pretty intense experience, yeah.
Yeah, it humbled the crap out of me. I went in this atheist, materialist, naturalist, rationalist, and I came out just confused, really.
Yeah, I think if you have a very big, I can only extrapolate from my big mushroom experience, but I think if you have a very solid, materialistic, physicalist grasp on the world, I think a really big psychedelic experience that kind of fucks with your sensations will probably shake that a little bit, or it probably should, maybe, you know.
So when you had it, did you come out of it thinking that your beliefs that were kind of anti-materialist whilst in the experience were rational, or do you think, I was just tripping, so it wasn't a thing?
Well, the first thing I did was I became way more empathetic towards people that had non-material or non-physicalist leanings. I'll just say material. I became a bit more empathetic towards it. I still had the feeling of it was I was on a drug, so obviously it's going to mess with my brain a bit. But it gave me a little bit more. I realized that I took for granted that we're kind of grounded in some experience that we assume is obviously true and real and couldn't be anything else. Because when you take enough of a certain drug and you fuck with that, you can see that, like, holy shit, my perception of literally everything, including myself, is like very much, like up for debate, I guess. So yeah, I guess I would still say that I'm a pretty materially, physically driven person. Like, that's still how I view the world, but I'm a bit more sympathetic towards people that aren't. And I recognize more that my own kind of, my quote unquote ego, my own like foundation or perception of the world can be maybe not as objective as I wish it would be, or I can't like validate or verify that, I guess. Yeah.
So I'm curious, we'll go to COVID after this if you want, but
yeah, no problem.
For me, it took me 30 psychedelic experiences to slowly, gradually increase the Bayesian probabilities that I was creating in my head that these non-materialistic things are real. Every time I'd come out and I'd be like, I just spoke to a non-human entity. I'll give that a 0.001% chance of being anything apart from some psychological phenomenon. Did you kind of dive back in after that one, or did you?
I had one other one where I accidentally, I guess, like had like another ego death level trip. I had mushrooms that were crushed in pills, and I thought they were bad because I wanted to do a big, or like a full, like I wanted to do like a 3.5 gram trip, and I took them, and it took about 2 hours and nothing happened. And then we just started eating more and more. We figured, okay, well, these are obviously bad. And then, it took like 3 hours for it to kick in. But then once it did, we even joked, it's like, oh man, imagine if in like 3 hours, like all 9 grams of this kicks in. And then it absolutely did. Geez. So, but that one was a lot.
He wins.
It was still very scary, but I had like a frame of reference for it, like, or I'd had like a prior experience, so I wasn't as traumatized, I guess, and it was more enjoyable, although still like mindfucky. But yeah, and then I've done like a lot of smaller experiences. I've never had a challenging experience on LSD. I've never done a lot of LSD. Mushrooms are still always challenging. They're so much more difficult. Even a 2 gram mushroom trip for me is pretty difficult.
They're cheeky, man. They're cheeky.
Yeah.
And I think for me, out of all the experiences that I've done, LSD has been, when I'm with other people, probably the least predictable. And I think that there's something along the lines of like we've co-evolved with mushrooms for I don't know how many millions of years. We've just invented LSD, and I'm a bit skeptical about the scientific ability to be able to replicate something so beautiful and perfect as co-evolution.
Interesting. I just feel the exact opposite. I think for LSD for me is always like, it's an easy experience. I'm super in control. I super love the peaking of it. It's just, everything is like so guided. I feel like with mushrooms, or I guess arguably whatever the purpose of the drug is, maybe you could say that this is how it should be. But for mushrooms, I always feel like I'm more kind of like along for the ride, and we'll see what happens. And hopefully it's not an excruciating experience.
No. I maybe misspoke. That's exactly the same. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I think if you have like, if you're trying to use,
it feels like you at least have a guide when you're on mushrooms, even if that guide is taking you to fucking hell.
Sure.
Yeah, in LSD, it just felt like I was just in the world existing, but in a fucking different dimension or whatever it was.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, COVID, man. And by the way, may I say, you seem so much more relaxed than last time we spoke. And I think you've taken, I don't know what you've done. Maybe you started meditating or something, but I really appreciate the change in energy. It's very noticeable.
Okay, gotcha. What did we argue about last time?
I don't know if we argued too much. I think it was along the lines of kind of materialistic science thinking versus more intuitionism.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Shamanism, shit like that. But yeah. So I'm very happy I can get to speak to you about this, because in the poker community that I'm a part of, not a single person out of the whole community that's kind of pro all the things that you would be on the side of the argument that you're on would have a conversation about it. Everyone's happy to kind of willy-nilly throw around, hey, here's what you should definitely do with your body, here's what is definitely the truth. But when it comes to substantiating it, it's been a real difficulty to actually get a hold of somebody that's willing to speak about it. So I really appreciate you speaking about it.
Okay.
I think that we're probably going to end up having quite a lot of agreements, but with the actual conclusions to those those data points, we're probably going to have some disagreements.
Okay.
So do you want to, I don't know how you want to do this, but do you want to maybe just give me some kind of timeline of how your opinions shifted since the beginning of maybe like February 2020 on the COVID phenomena?
I don't know if it's shifted that much. Can you be a little bit more specific, or in terms of what the question is?
Yeah, it was intentionally vague, but I can be specific.
I mean, I could try to just ramble, I guess, and we could pick up.
Ramble a bit so I get a feeling for where you're at and where we might disagree and agree, because I don't actually know your opinions on it. Yeah,
I mean, the coronavirus came out, seems to be the most infectious virus, I think, in human history. It seems like vaccinating is pretty important to prevent either overflow of hospitals or to prevent transmission as much as we can. Not as deadly as a lot of people on the left sometimes try to hype it up to be. Not as easy as a lot of people on the right seem to hype it up to be. It seems like mask and distancing mandates seem to be pretty effective at slowing the spread of the virus. That's like my general overview thoughts. It's going to depend, I guess, where exactly we agree or disagree. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on lockdowns, the efficacy, and the kind of philosophical nature of them?
Lockdowns seem to be really effective. One conversation that people don't like to have, I think people on the right are a little bit more willing to have it than people on the left. When we make any medical decision ever as a government, it's not just a medical decision. You're also making economic and social decisions as well. And I think people on the left sometimes are a little bit scared to discuss that. So for instance, we could eliminate every single virus or STD on the planet if we forced everybody to lock inside their homes for like 1 month and never come out and had like our officers and guns, right? But like there's social reasons why we shouldn't do this. Or theoretically, there's probably some level of distancing or lockdowns that we can do to completely eliminate some virus, but like the damage to the world economy, social conditions would probably be too great, so we wouldn't do those either. So there has to be some kind of balance, and then I think figuring out that balance is very difficult because we don't know like, well, what is too much or what's too much of a sacrifice, or how do we even measure those sacrifices? It seems to be a difficult thing to have done. Yeah.
Cool. So maybe we can just start with lockdowns. Do you have a girl's hair on the right hand side of your chin, by the way?
Oh, my long-haired women are just everywhere. Is it gone? Okay,
I think you got it. I
Okay,
think you got
Jesus.
it.
Yeah. If you ever break up with a girl and it's like really traumatic, the worst thing is you will find their hair everywhere for the like next 2 years in your life, in your car, and you're on your clothes after they come out of the washer, like in every part of your house. Like, geez. Okay, sorry, they're like dogs.
The smells, the songs on their playlist.
Well, I wasn't getting that deep, but yeah. Okay, what's up?
So I would say for lockdowns, I come from a position where I'm completely against them. I don't believe that governments should have the ability to decide when innocent civilians are inside their own homes or not. I believe that they were only manifested in 2020, and from before then, that it was actually recommended that lockdowns are not used in the case of any pandemic. And I believe that we've looked at the CCP and the Chinese Communist Party and just said, yeah, you guys seem to know how to do totalitarianism. Let's take a leaf out of your playbook. And I believe that they do way more harm than good, especially to the third worlds. So I don't know, pick apart that if you wish.
I mean, like, let's say there was like a highly infectious virus that incubated for like a couple weeks and then it had like a 40% mortality rate or something. If the only way to effectively halt the spread of this for a while was through lockdowns, would you still be opposed to lockdowns or something like that? Is there like a sliding scale here, or are you just like completely...
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult for me to imagine, because I think for a scenario like that to exist, we'd have to live in a world that has just different biological laws.
So you think that it is like a thing that it just can't be that there's ever a pandemic that wipes out a sizable portion of humanity? That's impossible?
No, I believe that that's extraordinarily possible and probably quite likely by the looks of things. But I don't know if lockdowns will prevent the spread of that kind of disease. But let me just answer, if that disease did exist and lockdowns were going to be the kind of circuit breaker idea of how we're going to get rid of it from our society completely, mm-hmm. I can see myself being super open to it. If there's, I mean, obviously I'd have to think about it in case there's other alternatives, but I could see myself being open to it.
Okay.
So it's not like
if I'm ever asking like an extreme hypothetical like that, I'm just trying to establish, like, is this something that you are diametrically, like, completely opposed to in all circumstances, or is it just you don't think the current circumstance warrants it? That's the only reason I'm asking.
Yeah, it's for that specific one. It's a little bit of a brain fuck to imagine this kind of alternative universe where we have this ex machina mm-hmm. policy that can just completely annihilate something. And just like, well, in this world, I believe that given how viruses work, given how people work, given how everything works, epidemiology works, I don't see that ever being a possibility. I just don't think it would actually work within the laws of biology and nature. But if I'm wrong on that, and if it turns out that the viruses do work like that, then yeah, sure.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, I don't know how much we're gonna have to dig into numbers here. Do you agree that for countries that did lock down and mask up like pretty aggressively, it seems like they did a pretty good job at stopping any transmission of the virus? And do you just think that the trade-off wasn't worth it, or do you think they weren't even effective at stopping it?
No, the world is crazy.
Huh. Was that me or you?
Definitely you.
Okay. I don't stream very often.
Yep, no problem.
If that happens again, I'll just turn it off.
Oh, no, you're fine. You might have like a donation thing up or something, maybe.
Yeah, probably. So, what was the question?
Do you agree that places that did lock down, that they were effective at stopping it, it just wasn't worth the trade-off, or do you think they weren't even effective at stopping it?
So I've looked a lot at the data, like a lot. I've spent fucking over 1,000 hours looking at these COVID phenomena, and lockdowns is probably the biggest one that I've looked at. And from what I've seen, all the graphs that I've seen, all the data that I've seen, that there's no huge positive correlation between severity of lockdowns, mandates, etc., and then I guess negative correlation between like deaths from COVID. So if we take all of the countries in the world and put them on a graph, what you'd expect if the lockdowns did work is you'd be able to see a very nice line from severity of lockdowns or harshness of lockdowns towards the top of how lax they are, mm-hmm. and on the y-axis of how many people die. And from what I've seen, and again, I'm very open to being wrong on this because I fully recognize that there are two different sides of the internet where you'll be seeing data and I'll be seeing different data, but from what I've seen, it looks more like a shotgun graph.
Hey buddy, I love you. Big PP and big poo ball.
So I don't think I would disagree with you when looking at the totality of all countries. But I think I think that if I was going to ask this question, I think I would be more concerned with looking at more specific cases, because how lockdown measures were implemented were so varied across so many countries. So for instance, if I were to just say every country that had a mask or social distancing mandate, and then I were to just try to graph all of those together, it seems like I would be capturing a lot of data where, yeah, this country had a mask mandate, but they didn't really follow it. Or yeah, this place had a mask mandate, but like these guys were like strictly adherent to it. When I look at countries that were a little bit more ardent about keeping to their restrictions, so like say New Zealand and Australia, it seems like these places had a phenomenally low number of cases compared to other countries where they had quote unquote lockdowns. I think like the UK and in places in the US, but like how strictly these were followed, like it doesn't seem like they were as well enforced, or a lot of them weren't even enforced. They were just kind of like guidelines or whatever.
Yeah, so perhaps we could compare some countries with similar climate, similar population, similar disparity or similar spread of density of population. Instead of looking at the first world countries, where I think a lot of the data is really, really shoddy. By shoddy, I mean manipulated. We could look at somewhere like Africa, say for instance Nigeria. They barely locked down. They had one lockdown, and then on the second one, the populace was just like, no. They had a split healthcare, so they had a public healthcare and a private healthcare, so they had access to things like ivermectin. I'm sure you probably think that doesn't work, but who knows? And they have a huge population. They've got a population of something like 210 million people, and the COVID deaths that they had were around 3,000. So that would just be a counterexample to the hypothesis that you were giving.
Yeah. So, do you? Wait. Sorry. Okay. Wait, so would you say you think that it's more likely that there is reliable medical data coming out of most African countries versus Western world countries or first world countries?
Not necessarily, and obviously there might be some countries where they're just in the fucking slums and they don't get accurate data. But my position is that there's been extraordinary amounts of data manipulation coming out of certain first world countries.
What can you give me an example of what you mean when you say this?
Yeah, so for instance, the obvious one that's kind of gone vogue at the moment is the misdiagnoses of COVID deaths and incorporating people that died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, including if they died of cancer or suicide or whatever.
So my understanding is that in the United States, this was an early talking point before the CDC, I think, could classify deaths well, where you would always include it on the death certificate if they had COVID deaths. But the idea that like a suicide is marked as a COVID death ultimately on the death certificate wasn't supposed to be done unless it was like a primary contributing factor. I don't believe that is the case. And then the backup evidence for that is that when you look at the overall excess deaths, they're up more than the reported COVID deaths. So it does seem like there was something that was killing people en masse more than, I guess, just like fake deaths on a death certificate.
I don't believe that's true. I'm relatively certain, and I'm open to being wrong about the US. I know for the UK for sure that they were counting, and I'm pretty sure it's for the US as well, that they were counting people within 28 days of a positive test. We can kind of check this afterwards, because I don't want to spend the whole conversation just going through.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, well, because some of these foundational data points might be really important, because where your conclusion ends up is going to stem from something.
Extraordinarily important. But what I don't think is going to happen in this conversation, I don't think that we're going to end up convincing each other based on, hey, look at this data, hey, look at this data. What I'd really love to achieve by speaking to somebody that's kind of on the other side is that let's just try and understand where we're coming from, and then try and argue from a macro point, because we're not biologists, we're not epidemiologists. We have no idea how fucking retroviruses work. We have no idea how fucking anything works really on the micro level, but we can kind of analyze the macro level. And I'd really like to understand how someone like you and me came to such dramatically polar opposite conclusions.
Okay, I understand the desire, but for the way that I analyze things is, I would assume that it all comes down to kind of the foundational level things.
Me too. And I've actually got a lot of data with me that I can kind of pull up as well, but not that specific one. So if you want to search for it, then
sure. The only reason I say it is because like I'm assuming we're both probably rational people, so. whatever conclusions we reach are hopefully going to stem rationally from whatever data we believe in. But if we believe in different sets of data, then reasonably, I think we'll have different conclusions. Like if I ask you, like, is John a bad person? And one of us thinks John is a rapist and one of us thinks John is not a rapist. The guy that thinks he's a rapist is going to say he's a bad person. The other guy's going to be like, well, he's not a bad person. Like, okay, well, let's ignore whether or not he's a rapist or not. Now let's have the conversation. It seems very hard to do that. We can try to move on from here. I'm just saying that like some of these like foundational data points are going to be pretty important, I think, in terms of...
I'm with you, man. I'm with you, man. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and I'm super down for sharing data. But at the same time, some of the foundational points that we'll have some disagreements on will be rational analysis of the macro as well. Like sure. I believe that you have made some irrational conclusions. You'll believe that I've made some irrational conclusions, and we can kind of skip between both. Okay,
well, where do you want to go from? Yeah, I guess where do you want to go from here then? I guess so.
The most important thing for me is, where are people's lines? And I think this is a question that everybody has to ask themselves. It's like, where is my line that the government overreaches to X, that I'll sit down and say, no, this is enough. I'm not budging. I'm not complying. I'm not doing whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So is your line mask mandates, or is your line getting people quarantined and shot in the face, or anywhere in between? And I guess I'm curious because from my perspective, a lot of the people on the other side, not that I see it as sides, but on the other sides of the arguments, seem to be very pro-establishment and seem to be kind of encroaching on totalitarianism pretty quickly.
So the way that I view it is, on a macro level, I think that society has kind of a forced buy-in to where when you're in society, you have to act in certain ways in order to have that society work. Everybody kind of has like some forced level of buy-in. So this might be like we have some set of laws we have to agree with, we have to pay taxes, whatever, these types of things.
You should try playing poker. You really don't have to pay taxes.
That is absolutely not true if you're playing casinos. The rake will fucking kill you. Maybe in some online places it's different. Everybody gets their taxes one way or another. And then if you're tipping dealers too, you're also super fucked. But regardless, if there's some sort of like minimum level of behavior that's expected of you if you're participating in a society. And I guess the question is like how much harm is caused by certain behaviors, and then how much should those behaviors be mitigated to prevent certain harms. There are some things where you and I could probably agree that spreading diseases should be illegal or punishable. So for instance, like if I knowingly have HIV and I'm just running around fucking people and I'm lying about getting tested or lying about having it, and people are getting sick, I think we would both agree, like, hold on, like this is not good. Like you're actually like killing people. Not to say that's the same as like the coronavirus stuff, but there's some level here that we agree on. So yeah, it's figuring out like what is the acceptable level of risk, I guess, that people can take or something like that. Yeah.
And so to answer the question, where is your line in terms of what could the government mandate do if they started putting unvaccinated people, I don't actually like the word unvaccinated, but use the common vogue phrase, unvaccinated people in quarantine camps? Would you say no to that if they tried to create a two-tier medical apartheid where, people like me, I didn't take the vaccine, aren't allowed out in society? Would you support that?
I think it depends on the severity of the disease. For some, depending on the severity of the disease, I'd say obviously, yeah, of course. If it's a disease that's like, if we're like getting to the brink of society where hospitals are legitimately getting overran, and we're starting to run into problems with like a massive number of deaths, then I would say like, yeah, at some point I'm going to be okay with the government saying like, okay, well, the fun is over. Like these types of people are going to be segregated in some way from society or not have access to certain things, or there's other like state enforcement things that we're going to have to do to keep society running. Yeah.
Yeah, so you think severity of disease, and I assume also efficacy of vaccine.
Or efficacy of whatever measure, right? Let's say there's a really severe disease, but masks and social distancing only stopped it by like 1% or something. I'm probably at that point not going to be like, okay, yeah, we need to, force everybody to do it.
Yeah. So where's your line in the other direction? What would you say? Hey, fuck you, government. I'm going to stick up for the rights of my unvaccinated peeps. I'm going to say, in this current environment with the coronavirus, with Omicron or whatever it is, like if somebody said tomorrow, all right, US, UK, we're going to be creating a two-tier society like they are in Austria, where people who are unvaccinated aren't allowed outside, and if they do, you'll go fined. If you can't pay the fine, you go to prison. Is that past the line or is that before the line?
With how deadly the disease is right now and how our medical systems are operating right now, I would say I don't think we're quite that far yet. And I think that the precedent there for this level of harm is probably not good. I don't think that would be an effective thing to do right now. It would be politically divisive. It'd be philosophically not defensible. And it would just take us down really weird roads that I don't think are good to go down right now. Not for the level of risk we're currently facing.
It's very nice to hear. Now, there are people in the poker community that I'm not going to name that are very, very pro two-tier societies, and that really fucking worries me.
Yeah, that sucks. But I mean, can you empathize with why people would feel that way?
100%, 100%. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I don't think that these people are stupid. I don't think that they're badly intentioned most of the time. But at the same time, I do think that they bought into a lot of propaganda. I think that there's a lot of movement happening across the world on the geopolitical spectrum where pharmaceutical companies, corporations, conglomerations, and the people who are behind the scenes kind of pulling strings are making a lot of money, increasing their power a lot, and it's at the expense of poor people. And I think that there's been a lot of media push, there's been a lot of push all around the world for people to buy into certain narratives. And I don't want to say this in a way that's going to sound like divisive, because I know that a lot of people, when hearing that, they'll be like, fuck you, it's not a narrative, it's a reality. So I'm saying this with the humility of I might be wrong, but from my perspective, that's what's happening.
Okay. I would say that on my end, I exactly agree with you, but like times -1 for everything. That I feel like all of the solutions to this are pretty obvious to me. All of the risks are incredibly minimal. Like what we should be doing just seems perfectly reasonable, but it's held up by a group of people that for whatever reason feel like they have uniquely identified some new world order, and hijacked by alternative media that makes a ton of message selling anti-media messages are kind of like holding everybody down in ways that is causing like more death and harm than what needs to be, I guess is how I would view it on my end.
Yeah, and I mean, there's truth to that. I mean, from my perspective, there's like a lot of people who are printing money off saying shit that's anti-establishment. There's a lot of people that are printing lies because they're just on the right and they want to be right. And I don't have respect for people with whom I disagree just because they're disagreeing because they're on the tribal right, or and I have more respect for people who will vehemently disagree with me if they're actually thinking for themselves and coming from an independent place. But from my perspective, there are just unmistakable phenomena happening across the world that you can kind of point towards and say, this is severe corruption. I don't want to use the word conspiracy theories because it makes people's brain melt, but it's severe corruption on a global scale.
So what would be like one of these points, I guess, so we can kind of like look at something?
Yeah, so if we look at the push for vaccines, for instance, and the data that's happening behind them, and the complete dismissal of anything that would take away the profits of the vaccines, I think that there's quite extraordinary corruption happening there, and with many other pharmaceutical products that have gone on the market, there's been clinical trial manipulation, hiding data, cherry picking data, and the people who are judging these clinical trials, the people who are analyzing them, are all funded by the same small group of people. And in my opinion, that's an extremely perverse reverse incentive structure. And
so let's just like think about like that thing. So in terms of who can analyze these trials, literally anybody on the face of the earth can. That's the whole point of like a peer-reviewed published journal, right? Anybody can look through the data and anybody can challenge any of the.
Oh, I don't know about that. We're still waiting for the data on the Pfizer trials. The raw data hasn't been released yet.
But every single country's medical body that is vaccinating their citizens is collecting data on their own. Like somebody, assuming there was something hidden in these trials, or assuming there was some research that wasn't like honestly, conveyed in the way that it should have been. Like some country, I imagine their medical body would have noticed it by now.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, I don't think that people are dying in millions secretly behind the scenes. I don't think there's some like grand cover-up of countless and endless severe side effects, but there are side effects. There are people that are dying. There are people that are getting strokes, heart attacks, myocarditis, pericarditis, all the things that people have just learned their words, their vocabulary in the last couple of years. It's happening on a significant level, not huge. You know, it's a small percentage over a large population, but it's more significant than other vaccines for sure.
More significant than other vaccines is hard to say because I don't know if you've ever tested a vaccine at scale like this one before.
Wait, what? There are a lot of vaccines that the whole of the US takes.
So there has never been a vaccine rollout worldwide, like for this, like there has been for this vaccine. No single vaccine has been rolled out as much as these vaccines for.
No, but if we look at like the measles vaccines, how many people have taken that in the US? Fucking everyone? Most, like vast majority of the population. So I mean,
potentially, but
in points and per capita, there's a lot stronger reactions to these mRNA jabs in the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca than there are for the other vaccines.
Okay. Okay, hold on, wait. There's a couple things. So firstly, for the measles ones, a lot of people have taken them, but in terms of like everybody across society taking a vaccine at once, so we see like all the effects immediately across all like strata of society, that's something that's that is absolutely unique with the current vaccine, number one. Number two, saying that there are side effects that we see for the mRNA vaccines that we don't see for the Johnson & Johnson AstraZeneca one is not necessarily true. The J&J and the AstraZeneca ones, I believe have...
Wait, you went full rap artist on me there. Just slow down for a second.
Sorry, yeah. So for the first thing, this is the widest vaccination program ever that we've ever done across all of human society, like at one point in time. I don't know if there's been... I got that.
Yeah,
okay.
And I agree.
So we see like all the side effects immediately, more so than we would with anything else, number one. And then for the number two part, what was the number two thing? Oh God, fuck! I just lost it in my brain.
It was all one syllable, so I have no idea what the fuck was happening.
This is the biggest one that we've seen so far. Hold on, my chat will remember what I was just saying. Oh yeah, you mentioned that like the mRNA vaccines were like uniquely risky versus the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. It sounded like you said that we saw problems with the mRNA vaccines that we didn't see with the J&J and the AstraZeneca.
I said and the J&J and AstraZeneca.
Okay, gotcha. It seemed like the problems between the two of these were a little bit different or dissimilar, I guess. I think with AstraZeneca and the J&J, there was a worry about clotting initially that the mRNA ones I don't think had. But
I'm pretty sure there's clotting. There's pretty heavy coagulation problems in the mRNA vaccines.
Okay, I haven't heard any of that. I know that the AstraZeneca one was canceled, or not canceled, but I think was recommended for different age groups, and the J&J one in a few countries because there was worries about clotting. I hadn't heard about any clotting issues whatsoever with the mRNA ones, but maybe I just didn't hear about that.
I've heard about it, but it's a bit of a brain fuck right now because I see, and I'm following a lot of the kind of anti-establishment people on these. I don't know if you want to call it that, but let's call it the anti-government overreach side of the argument. And I'm very aware that there might be some fucking Russian bots, there might be some trolls just making up adverse side effects, but I do see a lot of very, very genuine people, very real people, showing their side effects and saying, hey, 2 days after this I got a heart attack, or 2 days after this my husband died, 2 days after this I got a blood clot and I got a stroke or something like that. So from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of it, and I'm very aware of my bias there. Like I might be seeing it so much that I'm believing that it exists more than it is.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about that? Because this is something I've never understood about this line of argumentation. So it feels like when I talk to somebody, I'll just say on your side, if somebody dies with the coronavirus, it's like, we're going to break out the tools, or we're going to find out what the fuck happened, okay? Now, you said they had pneumonia, but what was the cause of this pneumonia? Okay, well, we're going to break into this, we're going to break into that, we're going to find out what... Okay, I don't think the coronavirus killed them. I think they had a pre-existing... And then we go very big into, like, this is what's going on. But then when somebody gets a shot, and then they die, or something happens 3 days later, it's like, 100% that was the vaccine. I know it with every fiber of my being. It's like, well, okay, hold on. The reason why I asked this is because I don't know if are you familiar with Project Veritas? Yeah, so Project Veritas did an interesting video where they talked about a young boy who died, I think 7 days or 2 weeks after getting his shot. But the interesting part was they actually showed part of his chart during that interview. And on the chart, it said that the kid had asthma attacks that were so severe, he'd already been hospitalized twice for pulmonary issues. And he was also massively overweight. And it's like, okay, well, holy shit, wait, why would we assume that another kid that has a third issue or a heart attack that kills him, why would we assume that's the vaccine over, it seemed like he obviously had some kind of pre-existing thing. Like people below the age of 18 aren't usually hospitalized as inpatient stuff for breathing issues. That's really rare. So yeah, I guess, I don't know. I'm sure there are a lot of people by the numbers that have died or had heart attacks or something after getting the shot. We have like 800,000 heart attacks a year in the US. Why are we assuming that those are caused by the vaccine, I guess?
So so first of all, I'm not a tribal kind of person. I know that there are going to be biases on both sides of the argument. From your sides, there are tons of people who will just fucking fist pump when somebody that they would label as anti-vax dies, and they'll say it's definitely because they didn't get the vaccine, or they definitely were saved by the vaccine when they almost died when they got COVID. And on my side of the argument, there are people that are fist pumping when people do die from the vaccine. And they're looking for deaths where they don't exist, and they might believe the troll accounts and things like that. So I know that there's going to be biases on both sides, and I also recognize that I might be wrong. I might have just seen a lot of very skewed data.
Sure.
But I feel very, very strongly about, and perhaps this can help you empathize with people on this side of the aisle. From what I've seen, and I really have researched this very granularly, there has been a huge movement in an unprecedented fashion, to misdiagnose COVID deaths in a way that the medical profession has just never seen whatsoever. There's zero medical precedent to diagnose, and I'm speaking about the UK here, I'm pretty sure I'm speaking about the US as well, to diagnose within 28 days. I've spoken to a ton of people who have had a family member die of something completely unrelated to COVID, and they were positive, tested positive, asymptomatic within the hospital, and ended up dying, and on the death certificate it's COVID. Whereas in the other side, again, from my perspective and from the perspective of a lot of people on this side, there seems to be perverse incentives to say that something isn't from the vaccine. So a family will have a completely healthy child. It's a story you hear a lot, and I've seen a lot. They'll take their child in to get jabs. The kid will get jabbed. They'll end up having some kind of horrible reaction, or they'll end up dying, and the doctor will say it definitely isn't the vaccine. And from my perspective, it's this very maniacal idea of it definitely can't be the vaccine, 100%, it's definitely not. And from this perspective of people on our side, again, I hope it just helps you understand it, it seems like the data have been manipulated very heavily in both directions, but kind of just like spreading outwards. So it looks like there are more COVID deaths, and it looks like there are way fewer vaccine deaths.
Sure. So do you have a lot of, I'm not trying to be condescending because I truly don't know. So when I ask these questions, I'm not trying to, okay. Do you have a lot of real life poker experience? Or do you normally play online?
No, I was mostly a live player.
Okay. And you've played like in cash rooms, right?
Yeah.
And you've gone over to the bar or over to a restaurant to get something to drink. Okay. If you have played live games, okay, then you know that this is true. 100% of aces and kings get cracked pre-flop, or they'll always lose every time. And the reason why you know this is because when you are over at a restaurant or you're over at a bar, everybody's coming over the program saying that like my aces got cracked. Every fucking time I get aces, every time I get kings, I lose. Every single time, right? You've heard this, right? I'm sure you've heard this like a million.
There's some selection bias there.
Yeah. But you absolutely hear it all the time. And if you were a restaurant worker working across from a poker room, you would probably think after a while, man, aces sound like a really shitty hand because it feels like they always fucking lose. What the fuck? When I have like discussions related to epidemiological things, public health things, I can't personally contend with any number of stories because one, I can't verify if they're true or not. Not to say that you're lying. I don't think you are. I hope you wouldn't. I can't verify like the veracity of the story. So maybe they thought there were no pre-existing conditions, but there were, and either they weren't aware of it or the hospital didn't inform them something. It's just impossible for me to grapple with it on a personal level. I can only really appeal broadly to what the data says. And then I have to look at like, if I do feel there are a lot of individual stories about something, which I think can be valuable, I have to see if I can either spot that trend in the data. And then if I don't spot it, I have to ask other questions about why people might be feeling that way. I feel like if there were a lot of people that were dying due to vaccine side effects on a vaccine that's been given over 5, 6, maybe 10 billion times, I feel like one person having like 10 stories about horrible side effects, if I were to blow that out to the whole population, there should be tens of millions of people or hundreds of millions of people like saying that like, holy shit, like we're losing people en masse to the vaccines. There's like horrible stuff happening and I can't tell anywhere like what's going on. Like this is a horrible thing, you know?
Yeah, maybe not tens or hundreds of millions, but maybe hundreds of thousands or millions across like the Western world. But because everyone knows like 100 or a few hundred people. But I guess the way that I actually let me take it in a different direction. I don't know if you watched the Joe Rogan Dr. Pete McCullough Spotify episode.
I might have seen parts of it, but I don't remember off the top of my head yet.
Fair enough. So the argument that he made, and I don't know exactly how true this is because I've not looked into the data, but the argument that he made is that in America you have the VAERS report, and you can assess how over or underreported that is by taking solitary microcosms where companies or corporations and conglomerations have looked at the data of their own employees, or have looked at the data of their own groups, or whatever large sample of people it is, and they've actually taken good numbers and look at the levels of adverse side effects that they've had within that group, and then adjust for age, etc., stratify it for risk, and then extrapolate that based on the whole US population. And the analyses that have been done by people a lot smarter than me seem to guess that it's around 4 to 5 times underreported from the VAERS, which, if true, would mean that there's an unprecedented rate of vaccine side effects per capita. That would be the argument.
So that could be possible. So are you familiar with anything about like what VAERS is in the United? I don't know if you live in the US or not.
Yeah. I've really gone balls deep on this whole subject.
Okay. So what is your like impression of like how how VAERS reporting works or whatever?
So from one side, from your side, I've heard people being like, well, it's just, you can just say whatever you have and just say it's down to the vaccine. And if it happens within 10 days, you just attribute it to the vaccine. And on the other side, I've heard Dr. Peter McCullough on the episode say that I think that he said the CDC checks every single one of those cases and makes sure that it's, it's a proper case, that it hasn't been fraudulent, that it's at least within a short amount of time between then and the vaccine. And when you see the rates of myocarditis in children, which isn't something that's just meant to just fucking randomly pop up, then you can start making some assumptions about it.
Okay. So I don't know who the other guy is, but based on that explanation, I don't think I would trust anything they would have to say related to this issue. So
I might have phrased it wrong.
Probably not, actually. You probably just So VAERS reports, you can literally go onto the CDC website and you can file a VAERS report right now if you want to. Now, in terms of like, does the CDC check into these? I think they've got a lot of people that they'll make sure that like the data entry is correct. And then if they start to see like broader trends pop up, VAERS is a really good place to form a hypothesis. So you might say, okay, well, hey, we've got a lot of stuff showing up on VAERS reports over these things. Like this is probably going to demand further investigation. Now, there has been a ton of research done based on reported side effects to the coronavirus vaccine. And I mean, those studies exist, but in terms of like being able to say like, well, look at VAERS, like this has been reported. It's like, okay, yeah, but anytime people go to investigate these things, we're not finding these massive broader trends of like all these people dying of strokes or heart attacks or anything like that. It just doesn't seem to be the case that if you just look at raw VAERS data and then you just assume that it's true, which I don't know why anybody would, because anybody can fill out a VAERS report and just submit it. And there's no reason to think it might be true or not. Anybody can do it. When you actually like break that out and you start trying to do these larger studies looking for these effects, they just don't seem to really pop up at all. I think that's the issue that I have with the people that like heavily rely on VAERS stuff.
From what I've heard, I don't know if you can, I know you can put a report in. I don't know if it'll be counted. You know if that's true? Because from what I've heard, that's not true.
I'm pretty sure anybody can put a report in and it'll just be there. Like that's how, like I think that the actual...
Somebody in the chat, test it out now and come back to us. Just make up, say your name's like Banana Hammock or put
Well, hold on, wait. I would not recommend people do that because it might be a federal crime because I think you might sign it under penalty of perjury, so...
I was joking, Twitch.
Oh, yeah.
I have no intention of inciting crime against humanity.
But I think... The only reason why I think this is true is because I had people that messaged me saying that like they'd gone through the database and they were sending me spreadsheets and shit. So I think that the actual data itself I think is publicly available. Like all the database, like the whole database, I think you can just download. Someone in my chat can tell me if I'm right or wrong on that.
Yeah, no, I've downloaded it myself before.
Okay, then every report should be there. But I there was a page I had once where people were going through some funny reports because people would write like just crazy shit there or whatever. But so I guess to bring this back like broadly, I think VAERS reports are a really good place to start looking, but I wouldn't like, I wouldn't just use those to say like, boom, we found something huge. Like I'm willing to bet, I have no evidence or no data of this, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of kids in the United States probably got sick with the flu or the cold every time a new expansion of World of Warcraft came out, And it probably wasn't because they were getting sick. It was probably because I wanted to stay home and play video games. But if I started to see all those reports, I might think for a second, okay, well, hold on. Holy shit, is World of Warcraft making kids sick? But there's probably another explanation for what's going on. And especially in an environment where there are a lot of alternative medias that are kind of poised to make you feel like if you're getting vaccinated, you might be getting sick, blah, blah, blah. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people were actually making reports there saying like, okay, holy shit, I think I'm having like a vaccine side effect. And it ends up probably being nothing. Or you know, it could be. I'm just saying that like VAERS is a good starting point, but never a good ending point.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Does it seem worrisome to you that there isn't a good system to collect or collate data on these vaccine side effects?
I think VAERS is a really good system. You have the ability
Wait, what did you just say for the last 10 minutes?
VAERS is a really good system for people to report side effects, but it's not a good system to say a side effect is caused by the vaccine. So let's say, okay, go on.
I could come up with a better system in 20 seconds. How about whenever somebody gets a side effect, they report it to their doctor has to put in some form. There's no incentive, reverse or perverse, or incentive in whatever direction, for the doctor to make money or not make money, or to be be sued or whatever it is to do it. And then it has to be checked by the doctor, and then it's on a database.
Two huge problems. So one, our medical system is already massively overstrained. So you're talking about creating even more work for medical professionals at that point. And two, if people really thought there was a conspiracy that hospitals were lying, because I think earlier you pointed, well, there's perverse incentives for people to diagnose people as COVID. Wouldn't you just be making the same claim right now? Well, of course they're saying on the VAERS report that they were clean. That's because they're doctors and they're rigged to say it. Like, wouldn't we be at the same place?
All right, give me another 20 seconds. I'll come up with a better one.
Sure thing.
No, I mean, fair enough. And here's the thing. I've spent a ton of time researching this, and I don't know whether these vaccines are going to be plus or minus EV for my health. And for anyone watching them, it's just like generally net positive if you ran the simulation infinite times, or net negative. But from my experience and from what I've learned and from what I feel inside of my body and from the severity of this virus, from the efficacy of these vaccines and from the side effects that I've seen of myocarditis, etc., and especially in young males, I believe it's going to be a net negative for me, and maybe only slightly, only slightly, because the chance of me dying from this or getting some kind of severe side effect, I trust my body. I think I've got a fucking great immune system. I think my body's in great shape. I don't think I'm likely to get one of these side effects. But I do believe that it's going to be a net negative over 50% of the time. Now, do you believe that if I'm making that decision, if I'm making the decision not to get vaccinated, do you believe that I ought not to be allowed into a society on public places?
At this point, probably not. Well, it depends on which public places we're talking about. Like, I can see arguments for like medical professionals being required to have more vaccines than the normal population just because of the types of patients that they intersect with, or people that work like in old caring homes or something with geriatric or old, I don't know if it's that right, with older patients, maybe. With respect to society at large, I don't think it's deadly enough yet that we should do that. I say that hesitantly because maybe that'll change, but yeah.
So the issue that I have with quite a few of these policies, and the thing that we actually shared on Twitter, is that when we were, and just to tell the audience, that we were talking about the idea of triaging based on vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. And the reason I was actually quite hesitant to speak to you before I found out that it was you, I thought it was just some random dude on Twitter that had his pronouns in his bio. By the way, your whole Twitter thing is a troll, right?
I mean, technically every single one is true. I just don't really care that much about him, so I'm not spending a lot of time talking about him, but yeah.
So it's a truth troll, anyway.
Yeah.
So the reason that I was very hesitant to speak to you is because you said something pretty inflammatory along the lines of unvaccinated people shouldn't be allowed medical care. I don't know if you...
I don't know where...
If there are full ICUs, but yeah.
So there was a conversation that we had on one panel about this, I think, where we kind of explored the idea, but there's a lot of issues philosophically about denying care to people that aren't taking care of themselves, because you can run that train back really far to a lot of different things. Such that, because a more common philosophical question before the coronavirus thing ever came out was like, should people that smoke cigarettes, should they get funding, or should they be allowed to be treated for, lung cancer and stuff? It's their fault. And the next question people always go is like, okay, well, what about people that are overweight? What about people that don't exercise? What about people that don't eat healthy? And it's like, okay, well, fuck, maybe it's really hard to dole out medical treatment based on personal behavior, because that just gets really weird really quickly. Yeah.
So do you rescinds the statement that you made?
I don't know if I ever made that statement. I think it was something we were exploring on a panel show. I don't think I ever came out hard like, oh yeah, they definitely shouldn't be. I think that if we were to reach 100% capacity at our ICUs, I think I would be 50-50 on whether or not we triage based on vaccination status, though. I think I would get to that point.
So this is probably a good thing to tackle, because one of the biggest issues I have with your side is that I believe that people have quite a propensity to demonize people who are unvaccinated in a really, honestly, psychopathic way. And I don't think you are, obviously, but I think that there's been a lot of push from corporate media to really heavily demonize people that haven't been taking the vaccine, and we can get into why that is later. But I believe that it's one treatment of many different treatments, and I'm not just talking about the alternative therapeutics like ivermectin, fluvoxamine, etc. I'm talking about whether somebody exercises, whether somebody eats well, whether somebody meditates. There's lots of different things. Whether somebody jumps in a cold pool every day. There's lots of different things that somebody can do to boost their immune system. And in my opinion, to triage or to treat people only based on whether they've had this one treatment or not is irrational, psychopathic, and it's a crime against humanity if it were to be put into policy.
Yeah, I would argue the exact opposite of that. I think that there are some things that we can say are reasonable efforts taken to minimize a risk, and there are other things that we can say are like extraordinary or would require like an extraordinary attention to detail. So for instance, let's say somebody gets in their car, and let's say that there's like a drunk driver in front of them, and that drunk driver kind of like scores off the road. And if the guy was a better driver, maybe if he took like a few driving courses, or maybe if he like went to the track a couple times and he knew how to drift his car really well or something, maybe he could have actually avoided that accident, but he doesn't.
What? That was a very, very good analogy.
Sure.
May I say, you just came up with that at the top of your head. That was very impressive.
Sure. Okay. So let's say that the guy does this and he gets into a crash and his kid dies, and it's like, fuck. Like, could he have prevented it? Yeah, he could have if he would have, taken, courses and stuff. Maybe. Okay. But, fuck. Like, am I really going to fault the guy for not doing that? Like, probably not. That's just like an extraordinary attention to detail. Let's say that on the flip side, you've got a guy who's texting and driving. He just got off work. He's like really tired. He probably shouldn't be driving, but he works a night shift or whatever. He's going home, texting and driving. Car swerves in front of him. He misses it, gets into an accident, kills somebody. I would hold that guy a lot more responsible, because there are reasonably easy steps that he could have taken to prevent himself from being in that situation, versus the other guy where I want him to take like some extraordinary steps. So if somebody's dying from the coronavirus because they're overweight, obesity and being overweight, these are like lifelong lifestyle decisions that oftentimes are thrust upon you as a child. Like kids that reach obesity before 18 have like a 1% chance of ever returning to a normal healthy BMI. Am I going to say like, well, you shouldn't have been fat? Like, damn, that's a tall order for a lot of people, versus like getting a vaccine that takes like 20 minutes of your day, go to a pharmacy, get it, and then you're home. I think that the level of effort required are different, and they make these like a fundamentally different class of actions or expectations, I would say.
Yeah, so for me, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm open to being wrong in it, but it just, for me, to take this kind of like deterministic lens on all of the other factors apart from the vaccine is like a double standard. Let's say, for instance, I'm very delusional in the fact that, I think that it's not going to be good for me. Let's say this vaccine is actually going to be one of the best medicines. You could say from a deterministic fashion, or from a deterministic standpoint, that started from birth. He was born into a family of hippies. I wasn't, but if I were, he saw loads of this misinformation, and because of that, he's decided not to get this vaccine. I just think that it's going to be on both sides of the equation, whether it's somebody losing weight or whether it's somebody taking a vaccine. There's going to be lots of different factors that go into it, and we have to take them all into account in a pretty equal basis. We can't just put this one thing on a pedestal and say, okay, this vaccine is the only thing you can do, because then you could say, okay, what if we come up with an alternative treatment like ivermectin or fluvoxamine or hydroxychloroquine or monoclonal antibodies? Are we going to make the same caveats for all of those if they happen to be proven to be clinically good at treating or prophylactically treating COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, if they're prophylactic, I think we could. Yeah, for sure. If we prophylactically figure out that like ivermectin or some other thing is like, if you take one pill a day, a month or whatever, you don't get the disease, then yeah, they're like, okay, well, this is like a pretty easy thing to do. Like women can take a pill every single day for their birth control. I think I could take a pill like once a month or even once a year or whatever the recommended thing would be for a prophylactic. If somebody's like, oh, well, this pill will prevent you from getting this worldwide pandemic that's killing, hundreds of thousands of people every year in the United States alone, I think that would be an okay thing. And I also think we can talk reasonably different levels of expectations, even through a deterministic lens. We're not going to say like, oh, well, okay, sure, that guy murdered a child, but if you look at the totality of life experiences, of course, he was always going to murder that child for fully, right? We have like different levels of moral agency, even if at the end of the day it is all fully determined. Like there is a big difference in effort, and even you must admit there's a huge difference in effort between like getting a vaccine versus like a complete lifestyle change to like not be obese, right? There's a hugely different level of effort here, and I think we have different levels of expectations for people to move from one decision to another as well.
Yeah, in a sense, obviously that's true. There's a difference in effort from injecting something into your arm or just not eating junk food. From my perspective, I look after my body and really fucking well. I don't put any foreign substances in. I don't eat anything that's processed. I don't eat anything that's unnatural. For me to put something that's extraordinarily experimental that I perceive to be minus EV, for me that's a lot harder than it would be, from my opinion, doing something harmful to my body than not eating junk food or not meditating.
I guess like that that classification doesn't make much sense to me. I guess I don't understand. So you take some foreign substance into your body, you have to eat, right? Food is a foreign substance, right? Maybe I'm being a little bit pedantic.
By foreign I meant unnatural. Sorry.
By foreign you meant what?
Unnatural.
Well, okay. Well, natural doesn't matter, right? Does it?
Yeah.
Like arsenic is naturally found in foods. Like,
yeah, I'm not saying all natural products are good, but I'm saying that I don't put anything unnatural inside of my body, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
At least.
Sure, gotcha. Okay, so the next thing also is like, do you consider like bacteria or viruses natural?
No. Yeah.
Because you're also constantly being exposed to those as well. Also, wait, how do you reconcile this with like doing like LSD and shit?
I don't do LSD anymore.
Okay. But you trust like all the, I guess you can argue that ayahuasca is natural, or it is a plant.
I don't do ayahuasca either, but yeah.
Geez, okay.
I'd be happy to in terms of how it would treat my body.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's weird because like you're constantly introducing your body to potential pathogens and everything on a daily basis, especially if you're like in any food area, or really any area where you're touching a handle or whatever. So I guess like that distinction is kind of strange, but
no. I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not making that argument that anything natural is good or anything unnatural is bad. I'm saying that for me particularly, I don't put unnatural things in my body as to the greatest of my ability.
Sure. Okay.
I won't eat foods that have pesticides on them. I won't eat things that have been processed. I won't eat things that have got chemicals in them. I won't take antibiotics. I'd probably take painkillers if I was in excruciating pain, but apart from that, I won't, because it fucks up your microbiome. And just to maybe go off on a different caveat here or a different tangent, is that I've personally been on a health journey where I had a bunch of different diseases and disorders and things that were really debilitating. It was a lot of brain fog. I had a skin disorder that science said was absolutely incurable, seborrheic dermatitis. I had teeth issues. I had allergies to foods. I had teeth issues, but by the way, the dentist said were completely incurable. They said you can't reverse, you can't remineralize your teeth in the way that you want to. And I spent tens of thousands of dollars asking scientists, holistic scientists, nutritionists, fucking shamans, traveling the world, trying to understand exactly how to cure myself. I started out in the modern scientific route. I put all of these fucking steroid creams on my face, and it made it so much worse in the long run. And eventually I got to the point where I managed to heal my body after fucking years of individualized experimenting and finding empirical data. And the way for me to heal my body was to not have anything unnatural come in my body and have very, very specific types of natural things come in my body. So for somebody like me, where it's like I put so much thought and care, and I'm lucky to, because I had these diseases that forced me to, basically, or not forced me to, but really incentivized me to. I put so much love and care into my body in turning myself into a very healthy person. It's very disturbing for me to see a lot of pretty unhealthy people say, hey, you need to put this unnatural thing inside of your body. There's no long-term data, but you need to, for the sake of yourself and the sake of the people around you. Whereas like every cell in my body is saying like, this isn't right. And I might be wrong on that. I might be completely off on that. But for me, it would be a lot of effort to go back to the original point. It would be a lot of effort to say, I'm going to put this inside my body.
Okay. Why? Geez, I mean, like, I get like, you have like personal decisions that you can make over your body, and I can only challenge those insofar as societally speaking stuff goes, but I can't challenge your personal stories. There's just nothing I can say or do about that. Or it seems like you're unswayable there in terms of your own personal decisions. I would say on a macro level, natural or unnatural, or processed or unprocessed, has very little bearing on how healthy or good something is for your body. Things can be good or bad for you for a variety of different biochemical reasons that have little to do with whether something is natural or unnatural. There are plenty of seemingly natural things that we do today that our bodies were probably never designed for. For instance, a super high diet in carbohydrates, and these can be totally natural foods that you grow out of the ground from start to finish. That doesn't make them good for you. Like, you could develop diabetes eating an all natural diet that's super high in carbs and things that spike your blood sugar. I think there are also things that are unnatural for us that are like pretty obviously good. I think there are, or I mean, maybe you don't agree at all, but I think there are some vaccines where it's like, the vaccine for tetanus or for like measles or stuff seem to have like almost no side effects. It seem to be pretty effective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything you said there. I think that you're still trying to argue against the point that I'm not making. It sounds like you're trying to argue a point that that you think that I'm saying that all natural things are good, or it's good because it's natural. I think that is one of the variables, and probably the biggest variable that I'll take into account.
Yeah, sure. I understand you're saying that. I'm just saying I don't think that should be a variable at all. I think it has almost nothing to do with the... I just don't think it should be a variable at all. I don't think it has any bearing. Your body can't tell if something is natural or unnatural.
I don't know how we could bet on this, but if I could bet my net worth on it, I'd love to. I can't think of any reasonable bet that we could make up. But yeah, from my perspective, and this is kind of going off topic, to really dig back deep into 500 million years of biological evolution is extraordinarily important when we want to find health. We have a society that's so sick to the bone of depression, anxiety, obesity, and whatever the fuck people are suffering from. And simultaneously, we have a society that has the highest amount of scientific literature available and the highest amount of pharmaceutical products available. And in my opinion, that isn't a coincidence. I don't disagree. I think that there are definitely cues that we can take from how we used to live that would probably increase our standard of living today. Absolutely. But I think that there are also some quote unquote unnatural things that we've discovered that can monumentally increase our quality of life today that just weren't available to us in the past. And I don't know. And like I said, I agree with that. And let me just be clear, because I think this is generally a pretty important thing to say. I would bet that the best invention that modern science has ever given us is vaccines. I think that it's definitely a contender.
Sure.
I'm very, very grateful for the fact that we've been given, either by pure coincidence or whether it's some fucking divine given gift, we've been given the ability to inject some kind of dormant or latent virus inside of our bodies. It creates an immune response. We're fucking safe from this specific virus. If anyone wants to call me anti-vaxxer for that, fucking have at it, but I'm not. But I don't believe that all vaccines are the same. I believe that some need to be taken with precaution, and I believe that we need to be making these risk-benefits analyses ourselves.
Hold on, wait, give me 1 second. Hold on 1 second.
No worries, brother. How's it going, chat? Destiny's chat. Don't tell Destiny I said this, but I watched him play some poker after we spoke last time, and he's a bit of a fish. Don't tell him. Nobody say. He's really bad at poker. As he should be. It takes thousands of hours to get good at poker, and you'd be surprised how many poker players that are complete professionals that have been playing for fucking decades still suck. They still suck. Let's look at some of the chat. Somebody said stabbing people is evil.
All right, I'm here. Sorry.
3 COVID vaccines and will not take any more. Fuck you, mother. Jesus Christ, that's getting pretty wild. All right, close chat again. We weren't talking about you, brother. Don't worry about it.
Do you prefer human milk or cow milk?
Nut milk.
Nut milk. Okay, not even oat milk or almond milk.
No, I'll take oat milk over everything. Actually, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't eat dairy.
Okay. Where are we?
So maybe to reiterate the point, I think you're right to make that counterexample. This is really getting off topic, but I think you're right to make the counterexample. Obviously, there are some things that are manufactured by modern science that I'll put inside my body, and I think it's plus EV. But I just believe that in general, one needs to be extraordinarily precautious if you want to try and fuck with evolution. We can come up with a dozen or 5 scientific studies that tell us that cooked food is good for dogs. But when it comes down to it, they've had hundreds of millions of years of evolution of not being able to cook things sitting around a fire.
Yeah, sure. I kind of sort of agree with you. But there are also like cases where we fuck with evolution a ton, and it's just clearly superior to what evolution had to offer us before.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, I would argue that like weightlifting is a very obvious example where like the way that we lift weights in a gym has almost nothing to do with how we used to get exercise in the past. But like if you want to build muscle or get stronger, lifting weights in the gym is going to be infinitely better than like going out and living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle trying to climb trees, right?
I disagree with that one. Maybe not the last sentence. I don't know how I feel about that. Depends on the context. But if you ask weightlifters who have gone fucking extreme on weightlifting, they have a lot of joint issues, a lot of back
okay, hold
pain.
on, wait, to be clear, I'm not talking about extreme. The extremes of everything is going to be unhealthy, right?
But the point that I'm making is that people that I've spoken to tend to say that if you want to have a fit and healthy body, you got to do the things that are more natural, like jumping. Like lifting weights a little bit, like fucking doing, cardio and a mixture of different things that are a lot more designed to replicate what we would have done in.
Yeah, so like if you want to build like good like cardiovascular health, sure you can do like cardiovascular activities, but like if you want to like build a lot of muscle in like a healthy or like proportioned way, there's no shortcut to that in the natural world. You're going to be in a gym lifting weights. There's no way to emulate that stress naturally in a balanced way. You're going to have like really big muscle imbalances in your body, or you're going to be missing some groups of muscles if you just like try to run and swim all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, personally, and again, it's getting really off topic, but I don't think that I think a lot of the gym culture is pretty unhealthy in a certain sense. I think that it's quite obsessive in a certain way to get certain muscles quite big, and it's missing out on small muscle groups, and there needs to be a lot of supplementation of different things, whether it's fucking qigong and yoga or whether it's different cardiovascular things.
Sure, there can be. I'm not trying to make this totality argument that like we've defeated evolution. What I'm saying is that like the biggest thing that we evolved as humans is our brain, right? I think it's like 20 to 40% of our daily calories, I think, just go to powering our brain. For people that play League, probably less, but for the general population, it's like this is the thing we developed. I think that there are things that we figured out using our brains that like we can take natural processes and we can kind of like play on those things in ways that make them better, but like they might look unnatural. But I guess it's more like a broader philosophical argument. Like I guess I just disagree. We're kind of fighting around this like natural versus unnatural thing. I think that there are things that we can design that are quote unquote unnatural, but they're not really unnatural. They're just like we're just kind of like optimizing through our behavior things that exist in our things that we can take advantage of because of our evolution. Maybe this is a less contentious example. I don't know if this is true or not, but have you ever heard of the theory that cooking meat is what allowed us to become like successful humans?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the idea that like we spend so much time chewing nuts and roots and we like take so much time and so much energy, and even for raw meat it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy, and the idea that cooking meat freed up so much more time of the day and so much more energy in our bodies to do other things, that would be an example of like, okay, well, we didn't evolve to just eat cooked meat, but using our brains and a tool we figured out how we could do this, and then that kind of like played on our evolutionary pathways to make us more successful and advantageous in society. And then in other ways it hurt us too, right? So like our mouths are probably too small for our teeth now, because in our early days now we eat soft foods instead of chewing stuff all the time. We don't develop the big jaws that we used to have that would fit all of our teeth. So there's like pros and cons. Do you think any of that is okay, or?
I'm not sure that's exactly the best explanation for that theory, but yeah, no, in general, agree. But I don't think that super well translates to current times. You know, we still have millions of years of I don't know exactly how long, but millions of years of eating cooked meat, and our bodies and natural processes have adjusted over time for that to be working for us. Now, if we take something, for instance, like an antipsychotic drug or an anti-anxiety drug, you know, we might be able to fuck around with some things that are happening, our serotogenic neurotransmitters or whatever the fuck we're trying to screw with. But we don't know what side effects it's going to be. And I always think it's like, I always get this image of like somebody trying to fix this intricate watch with a fucking hammer. Like, you know, that tick is going a bit too fast, boom, you know, and they've just shattered 300 other things that they don't understand. And that seems to be what happens when we take a lot of unnatural substances. So I'm not saying unnatural things are never good, but what I'm saying is that I think humans have this like godlike propensity to imagine themselves as able to fuck with nature when nature's so intricate that we barely understand 0.001% of our body.
I wouldn't say our understanding is that low, but I think we both agree with each other more than we realize. We're just pushing very hard on both of our other ends, because every example that you give, I agree with you, and I think you kind of broadly agree with my example. Like SSRIs and antidepressants, everything that's, if you want to talk about a shotgun, that's definitely like a shot in the dark. We're trying to do something with a tool that it's not very well understood, but we're just going by clinical outcomes. I'm not going to disagree with you there that sometimes we overestimate, or I wouldn't even say we overestimate. I think we're aware, like, okay, yeah, we don't know much, but like this is the best we can do for now. I wouldn't disagree with you there. I think we both broadly agree on this, but we push a little bit harder and on our other direction, maybe on the other side. So maybe
I think that we agree on a lot of the minutiae, but when it comes to how we would apply that into the real world, there's obviously a huge disagreement. And maybe to take it back to the pharmaceutical industry and the vaccines.
Sure.
I think let's say, for instance, in 1,000 years from now, if we carry on in a good technological path, this kind of exponential increase, we'll look back at how we know things now, about how we think we understand viruses, about how we understand mRNA vaccines, about how we understand so many things, and we'll be like, those guys were primitive assholes. They had absolutely no idea. They worked this out, but they were completely wrong about X, Y, Z, A, B, C.
I don't know about that, but...
Or everyone in history, at every point in history, people have been like, I think we figured it out this time. I know that decades ago they thought they figured it out, but I think this time we got it. Of course, in like 1,000 years, when everything is developed, we're gonna look like fucking apes in comparison, because their technology is gonna be so advanced.
Oh man, okay. There's a really good short.
Whilst we're searching, can I just finish off the points?
Yeah, go for it. I was responding to this point. Yeah, go for it.
So one of the reasons that I'm very hesitant to take these COVID-19 vaccines, let's say all the data haven't been manipulated, all the data are completely clean. Even if we had this grand scientific consensus where like 90+% of doctors and epidemiologists and virologists and vaccinologists all said everybody in the world should take the vaccine, I would still be very hesitant, because in 1,000 years' time, they might think completely differently when they have 20/20 hindsight vision of how history worked.
Yeah, but we can only go by the best of what we have now, right?
Sometimes. But sometimes I think that we live in this very psychotic world where, you know, most doctors or most psychiatrists will give you an SSRI if you have anxiety, instead of asking you to fucking like sit under the moon and fucking meditate or whatever. Okay.
Do you know who Isaac Asimov is? Have you heard of a science fiction author?
No.
Okay. He's got a really great essay called The Relativity of Wrong. And basically what he argues in this essay that I think is really interesting is saying that the earth is flat is actually a pretty intelligent thing if you are somebody that existed in society thousands of years ago, because there's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of hills, there's a lot of valleys, and to take all of that and to say, well, the earth is flat, to generalize it in that way, you're not actually that far off of the earth being flat versus the earth being round, right? If you say that the earth is flat, you've made some generalizations, you've made some extrapolations, you're actually like you're missing like a very slight angle to make the earth round because of how huge it is. And then when you say, well, the earth is actually a sphere, well, that's also incorrect because of how gravity works. It pulls the center out a little bit. We're like an oblate spheroid or something, right? But you're getting closer and closer and closer. I think that it is a mistake to look at past societies and say, well, look how absolutely wrong they were about everything, because I think past societies do figure things out. We just refine the knowledge over time. So I know that you know this if you've been doing like your shaman hunting and all this stuff. A lot of the common day medications we use were known in the past to be pretty effective as well, like for instance like aspirin coming from tree bark, or a lot of the types of painkillers we have coming from is it opium? What's the name of the plant? They're like plants, or like tobacco, coming from plants. Like there are things that we know that people, ancient healers, you could even say, have been practicing for a long time, where it's like, oh yeah, like this thing, we've built upon this. Oh, the poppy flower nightshade. I don't know, whatever the fuck it's called. We've been building upon the knowledge over time. I don't think it's really fair to say that at one point in time, science was so wrong, and every few years we come and the whole paradigm changes and everything was wrong and it was so dumb. Well, no, I think we've figured things out well enough that we can achieve some effect, and then we kind of refine the knowledge as we go on. Otherwise, you end up in this world where I don't know how you could trust anything about anything without thinking the whole world is going to collapse in on itself and destroy you. No?
No, I don't agree with it. So just the first thing you said about it was intelligent to believe that the world is flat back in the day, I don't agree. I think it would be intelligent to say, with the information that I have at hand, there is a high percentage chance that the world is flat, but I don't know. I think that's the more intelligent thing to say. And this is actually a really important point in my opinion, because a lot of people don't have that ability when they have this, scientific consensus, or they have a lot of data that support their arguments or their biases, to be able to say, this is what we think is right, but we're not actually sure. And this is actually one of the biggest problems I have with people that are very big proponents of these vaccines or these mRNA jabs, which I actually don't think of vaccines by definition, or at least it used to be until 2021. Is that there's this level of fanatical 100% certainty that really worries me. And I don't think that it comes from an intelligent and rational place. I think that it's fine to say, okay, I'm 98% sure. I think that would be irrational. But even if you believe all the data are clean, 98% certainty would seem, relatively reasonable. But this 100%, it's definitely right. You definitely need to do it. It really does worry me. I had a second point to make on what you said, but I forgot what it was.
Okay. I agree with you that people that act 100% I would agree that that's true. So another poke analogy I guess to use is so I believe that I think people have 3 percentages built into their heads, and that's all they intuitively understand. I think people understand 100%, 0%, and 50%, right? I don't think anybody intuitively knows what 75% feels like, or 20%, because when somebody has a 20%, if somebody's got a 10 outer on the fucking river and somebody hits it, it's how could that happen? It's bullshit. It's impossible. It's well, not really. Or even 2 outers, right? Or it's not impossible. What is it, 4 or 5%? That's nowhere near impossible. If you play video games for a long time, you know that 3 or 4 or 5% that could be a really big number depending on how many times you run something. I think that a layperson will have an issue with oh well, I 100% know that this medical thing does this or that. I agree with you that is a problem and that's a bad thing. But I think if you talk to scientific people, I think they're a little bit more honest. Anytime I talk to anybody that has a background in biology or anything, they're usually pretty upfront with being yeah, we really don't know 100% why SSRIs do what they do. It would be a lie to say that we understood how all these neurotransmitters interacted with the body. A lot of it is trial and error. Even in the prescription process is trial or error. I think the people that are actually involved in the research will be a little bit more, I don't want to say forthcoming, other people are lying, but I just think a general human, I think, has a really big problem understanding a percentage that's not 0, 50, or 100. And I don't know if I would discount everything in the scientific world just because of that.
So first of all, you gotta play with some better poker players, man.
Well, I'm talking about normal people, right?
Yeah.
Because when you do poker, the first thing you have to teach somebody is well, what is it You don't evaluate how good or bad your play was based on the outcome, and you have to understand the percentages, because a 2% is not impossible, a 90% is not a guarantee, right? You have these are things you have to learn, or at least I did, maybe I'm especially stupid. But when you're getting into poker, learning the percentages is really important, because it always feels as a human, it's it's either 100-0 or I'm flipping a coin is what it feels like.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of counter that, and coming from a poker player's perspective, it's when you play millions and millions of hands of poker, you have to build up, and without meaning to, you will build up this deep-seated intuition of what 5% feels like, of what 7% feels like. Not just from you see a 2-outer happening on the river, and you're okay, that's 4.5% or whatever, but because when you're making these multivariate analyses in your decisions, it's too many variables for your intellectual mind to be able to completely comprehend. So you have to fall back on your intuition. You have to feel it out and then make a discrete and concrete intellectual answer, I bet or I check or whatever. So I believe that with training and with rational knowledge and with cultivating intuition by doing other things like meditation, you can really get yourself in a mindset where your intuition is powerful at understanding different percentages. And then from a rational perspective, you see that through a Bayesian perspective and say, okay, you can adjust that as it goes. So when, I guess, to try and tie it back into what we're speaking about with the vaccines, it really worries me as somebody that I like to see the world through a Bayesian perspective. I like to see through probabilities. It really worries me where I see normal people that are normally very humble, people that are normally very kind, people that are normally very chill, say with 100% certainty about these vaccines, and only these vaccines, that they have to be the way out the pandemic. There's no other way apart from masks, vaccines, social distancing. And I know it's this new buzzword to say mass formation psychosis, but to me it does feel psychotic from a large amount of people. And I'm sure I'm getting some kind of selection bias on Twitter, but Do you agree that there is a huge amount of people that have just got this maniacal idea of how things work, and it has to be this, it has to be that, and there's no way I can be wrong? Because from my perspective, that's really worrying to see.
I mean, like, yeah, but again, it's always going to be like, I would never let like a normal person's intuition like make me decide how I'm going to live my life or what I think the correct things to do are. I feel like that would be more damaging than just following the herd, is to just walk in the opposite direction because I think they're going the wrong way. There are absolutely people that are a little bit too dogmatic in their approach to things, and I try to push back on this when I can, if for no other reason because they make people like me look bad. And I agree that that's definitely an issue, but I don't agree that like because of that I'm just gonna make the opposite decision because fuck them, because I don't trust them because they seem like they're going too far in one direction.
I don't know where you're getting the idea that anybody would say that. I mean, I'm sure some people will, but not.
Well, yeah. So like, the only reason I think is because you bring it up, right? Like, I don't care what people in public say about like the vaccine being good or bad or blah blah blah. Like, I'll just go by what the research says or what like all the entities come together and seem to agree on. That's usually what I'll go by. I don't care what people's opinions are on it. But I feel like a lot of people are saying things like, and you've seen this, I know you have. I've seen this where people are like, I'm not getting it just because they're trying to mandate it. It's a bodily autonomy issue. Just because they're trying to make me, I'm not going to do this as a matter of principle. It's like, okay, well, that seems a little bit silly, but I mean, to each their own.
Yeah, I mean, I empathize with it. Like, and for instance, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, "Take this vaccine or I'll kill you," I wouldn't take it.
Okay.
Not because I'd rather be dead, but because I believe that as soon as one becomes coerced, one can be coerced, and other people can be coerced by governmental force. And I think that as soon as you take that one step and say, oh, okay, I'll bend my knee a little bit, then more is taken, and history seems to show that quite consistently. So I do empathize with people that have this instinctive reaction of, I think the government is overreaching here. I think that the government should not be able to tell me what to do with my body, and because of that, I'm going to say fuck no.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I can understand the feeling, although I think these arguments are a little bit different than the this is getting into like fundamentally different argument than whether the vaccines are good or bad. Now we're talking like government overreach and whatnot, but
yeah, I mean, but the good and bad thing, honestly, I couldn't care less if you took the vaccine or not. And you might be right. You might be right at this plus EV. It's really good for society. And I could be completely misunderstanding the data, or I could be just completely intuitively wrong. Whatever it is, my research could be completely off. No, I would die in the fight for your right to be able to take this vaccine. If the companies had made it, I think that's extraordinarily important. What I would hope is that people who are very pro taking these vaccines would be able to stand up and say, I think this is great. I think people really need to take it, but if the government tries to mandate it, if they try and say that you're not allowed it outside of your house or you're going to go to jail or some quarantine camp like they did to some people in Australia, if you don't take it, then I'd hope that these people would be able to stand up and say, enough is enough. Here's the line in the sand that I draw, even though I disagree with these people.
I think that the reason why these things are such a unique thing, even though like I could agree with this in a lot of other ways, but I think the problem is because this affects everybody and you have the ability to infect other people, it seems more than just a personal bodily autonomy thing. It's less arguing for like the way that it's framed oftentimes from the crowd that's opposite the mandates is they're trying to make it sound like the government shouldn't be able to force me to wear my seatbelt. But I think from the other side, people are more arguing. It's like, we don't really care if you wear your seatbelt. The problem is we're worried about drunk driving. And I think that like the disconnect on this argument that it's not really about just vaccinating yourself, it's about like keeping the rest of society healthy, is why it's so hard to connect these two trains of thought sometimes.
Yeah. I actually don't think the government should be able to make someone wear their seatbelt, by the way.
Sure, but you probably think the government should be able to punish you for drunk driving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
which is a hard thing to balance, and I get the point that you're making.
Well, no, I think it's an easy thing to balance.
I'd like to say I feel my mind shifting a little bit in towards like there are nuances to this argument that I know that I can feel that I haven't fully dug into, but something really, and I feel intuitively really powerfully that the bodily autonomy one is something that should not be broached. And I think that it's a terrible slippery slope. And I don't think that the people in positions of power right now and the people that are kind of pushing these policies, which are some of the most politically corrupt people in the world and personally corrupt people in the world, should have the right to be able to determine what goes in and not in our bodies.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you 100%. And this is why I say that like it comes down to the data. It's not really like a philosophical argument because our conclusions are going to be pretty similar. I think that the issue though is that the bodily autonomy thing can be argued on the like vaccine mandate side. Like somebody might say like, I should be able to go out publicly in a restaurant or in some area and know that somebody hasn't spewed a whole bunch of some virus that is going to enter my body, make me sick and potentially kill me or maim me or infect me. And then I'm going to infect grandma and grandpa and they're going to die because they're fat and old. I think that like an anti-vaxxer and a pro-vaxxer, I don't like to say anti-vaxxer, an anti-vaccine mandate and a pro-vaccine mandate person can both make the bodily autonomy argument. They're just going to be making it in different ways. Kind of like how like a man might argue about autonomy based on like whether a woman is being truthful about being on birth control, or whether somebody might make a bodily autonomy argument on like, have you actually gotten tested for STDs? Or are you lying about it? Because I'm not going to take something into my body that you're not telling me about. I think that that's a violation of my bodily autonomy. And I feel like the argument can be made on both sides.
So just to try and test that a little bit from the side of the argument that would say that, you know, it's against my bodily autonomy for you to be spreading a virus.
Yeah.
Back in 2018, when there was a pretty bad flu going around, would you make that argument against an obese person that is obviously more at risk at spreading a high viral load from being in a public place?
This goes back to like, what is like the reasonable lifestyle thing? If obese people were like 1% of the population, I think I could see that argument being made. But when obese people are like 40% of the population or whatever, it's a little bit harder because now it seems like we're talking about a big diversion from what
I don't know how much you've looked at the statistics of unvaccinated people in your country, but it's pretty fucking higher than 1%.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that like if a very, very, very small number of people had something, then it seems like that thing is probably not like a commonplace, ordinary thing in society. But when like a lot of people have it, well, like we can't tell 40% of the population to stay inside, and it seems like that's kind of how society is going. So it seems harder to be judgmental about that particular thing. Does that make right?
But it looks like you are telling, I don't know what percentage it is in America, like 30% of Americans to stay inside. If you're on the argument of the pro mandates.
To stay inside.
Yeah, if you're pro mandates, you're not creating a two-tier society saying that unvaccinated people should not be allowed in public places. You're telling 30% of the population to stay inside their home.
Well, yeah, but that's because the effort to get vaccinated is so minuscule compared to the effort to change your entire lifestyle.
Oh, no, that's a different point than what you're making before, though.
Is it? Can you recenter me then, or I think I lost it.
So you were making the argument. I think I need recentering as well, but you were making the argument that because it's such a large percentage of the population that would be obese, then we ought not to be able to mandate that they stay inside.
Well, it wasn't mandating that they stay inside. It was it had to do with is a behavior super abnormal or is it the normal? So if it was the case that like being obese seems to be like pretty normal in society, which it is, it seems harder to say like, well, just don't be obese, because it seems like to divert from being obese is an incredibly difficult thing. If like 1% of society was obese, then like I could see it. Like say in Japan, that's like 1% of people are obese, and like, okay, we have a huge virus and obese people are fucking all of us over. You need to stay home. Like you guys are fucked. You need to change your lifestyle. There's no reason for you to be obese in today's society because like only 1% of you are. But when we're in a society where it's like, okay, well, 40% are obese and like 80% are overweight. Okay, well, fuck. It seems like society, we have some breakdown here. It's a little bit harder to place that expectation on somebody. So, you know, it's probably not as fair to say like, okay, well, you guys have to be restricted now, even though this is kind of like commonplace or ordinary in society.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy the argument that kind of normalization is a kind of green light, or makes it the distinction between whether you can mandate something or not. But kind of moving away from that, because it like you said, it does feel like we agree on a lot of the minutiae. And I guess what I would really love to hear from you is like, at what point? Because from my perspective, we're marching towards, in certain parts of the earth, really unprecedented global tyranny, overreach from the government, terrible things happening from my perspective. At what point, if things got worse, you know, if they started imprisoning unvaccinated people in Austria, for instance, quite soon, will you publicly say, this is fucking disgusting, this is not okay, and you should not be doing this? Like, can we at least agree that there is a line in the sand, whatever that line is?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a line in the sand, right? The most extreme thing is like, could the government show up and shoot you for not being vaccinated, right? The thing is, the hard thing is that I don't believe that either you or me have a hard line in the sand there. I think that it's all going to come down to like, where are we at societally dealing with the virus? Do you agree with that, or do I need to use an example? For
me, I disagree with it. I can see from your perspective why that would make sense.
Well, so like, let's say, for instance, there was a virus that when you were infected, it lay dormant for 30 days. And then once it started, you were going to die 100%. Say it's rabies, it's airborne rabies, and you can just breathe it onto people, right? Would you agree at that point that if we found out that rabies was airborne, but if you took a vaccine, you were 100% protected, but if you weren't, you would run around and breathe it all over people, that people that don't get vaccinated for that should probably literally be killed and removed from society? Otherwise, they're just walking around breathing rabies on people, and say the vaccine is only 50% effective, so even if you are vaccinated, a non-vaccinated person could still give you rabies like that, like those people probably have to be removed from society, no?
Yeah, okay, so if there was a virus that had such a high contagion rate and such a high lethality, and also we had a vaccine that was 100% good at stopping transmission, but not 100% good at reducing fatality, then yeah, I don't know if that's ever a possibility.
It might not be. And I agree, that's an extreme hypothetical, of course. We're nowhere near that with the coronavirus. I don't think that either you or me are on principle opposed to the government taking drastic actions. It's just we're probably not even close to that with the coronavirus, which I also would agree. We're nowhere near, I don't think the government should be imprisoning people for not being vaccinated. I just don't think the virus represents that level of harm yet to get there, but it's potential.
Have you tweeted out against what's happening in Austria or Australia yet?
So I try to be very cautious when I talk about other countries because they run their stuff in very different ways. Are you American, or were you born somewhere else, or?
I'm English.
Oh, okay. Oof, I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that.
My girlfriend's American, and she kind of stole my accent. So.
Gotcha. The only comparable thing is, for instance, I really like the freedom of speech we have in the United States. I don't like the idea of hate speech laws. But when somebody asks me, well, in the UK, how do you feel about these people being imprisoned because they made Nazi jokes or getting fined or whatever for it? My response is usually I don't know. I wouldn't like it in the United States, but I'm not going to try to speak much because legal systems in other countries and their democracies, it's a totally different thing. On principle, in my country, I would be opposed to it. That's usually what I'm most comfortable answering. But it's hard. But anytime I say in that country, I don't think that should be legal. I'll get 50 people emailing me, well, didn't you know that in New Zealand or in Australia, this and this and this, and there's precedent for this, and this is why they do it. It's okay, well, fuck, I don't know your fucking country's legal system or how your government is structured. So, so to broadly, it sounds like a weasel answer, but broadly speaking, I would be.
Just about to say it was a cop-out.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Broadly speaking, I would be opposed to imprisoning people. In my country, I wouldn't want people to be imprisoned for not being vaccinated. It doesn't seem like we're anywhere near that point. That's what I would say.
Okay, so it really doesn't sound like a convincing argument to not want to look at other countries and criticize them. I think that we do that if we're analyzing geopolitical landscapes consistently. We look at the healthcare systems of Sweden. We say we like it. We look at I assume you say you like it in the Scandinavian countries. But you look at how China is locking up Buddhists, Muslims, and Christians, and you're like, I probably shouldn't be putting them in concentration camps. There's a lot of examples that it's not hard to go out on a limb and just say I'm against the imprisonment of hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs. I'm against that, and I can personally say I'm fucking against that. No one is ever going to change my mind, and I'm going to publicly speak about it. So when it's something as extreme as locking up unvaccinated people because they can't pay their fines, which, by the way, only means that the poor unvaccinated people get locked up, because the rich ones, they can pay the 600 euros a week or a month, whatever it is. Surely that has to be a line in the sand for you to say, I'm going to speak out against this.
So this is the reason why I would be hesitant to say this. So in Australia and New Zealand, my understanding is that they're having their lockdown protocols were pretty strict in terms of who could get. We're incredibly strict for Australia in terms of getting in and out of the country, in terms of the day-to-day life in society. They were very, very, very strict. If it was the case that, democratically speaking, most Australians supported that, and most Australians were willing to shoulder the burden of that, and there were just a few people that weren't, and then when it came time to do the vaccination things, and we saw that okay, well, this is pretty good at reducing transmission in conjunction with other things, and some people were bucking that and were causing widespread outbreaks to happen, in those cases, I could totally empathize with people being like, you know what? Yeah, fuck it. You should be fined and thrown in jail if you can't pay the fine, because all of us decided to shoulder this burden and suffer in this manner. And if you're going to take a selfish action that's going to throw a wrench in all of that and then make all of us have to suffer even longer, then no, I think that you can either pay a fine, get vaccinated, or go to jail if you can't pay the fine. I would be empathetic in there. But from a U.S. perspective, we didn't take any of those extreme lockdown measures, so I can't really empathize in the same way, or I can't say we should do in the U.S. But I could see arguments where an Australian or a Kiwi could argue that, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure. I in this case, I would agree that sure, you can find people or lock them up if you guys have all collectively done this burden, and these people are like the one thing, like, you know, messing it up and keeping you from getting to where you want to be.
That's pretty wild. It's pretty extreme. I don't know. I know you're not an extreme, like, maybe you are, but at least the things you've said today are definitely not extreme to me. But the idea of a first world country that would lock up its citizenry based on whether or not they've had one of the many available treatments, prophylactic and I guess it's just prophylactic for the vaccine, treatments available, including fucking diet and whatnot, that an innocent person should be ripped away from their family. Sorry to use emotive language, but you know, it's an extreme thing to do, to take away somebody's liberty. To not be able to say that that's wrong, I think it sounds to me at least very extreme.
Sure, but I mean, I would argue it on the other side. When we have vaccines that have been given more than any other vaccine in human history across the planet in such a short period of time, we see that the side effects are incredibly minimal, especially less compared to the actual disease itself. When we see that we have the most infectious disease in all of human history traveling across the planet, and somebody decides that they don't want to go and get a vaccine, and they'd rather put every other person in society, especially older people or people with comorbidities, at risk because of a podcast they saw from either Joe Rogan or Ben Shapiro, I would say that person is incredibly selfish, and arguably their values are like incompatible with society, and they need to figure their own shit out. From an emotive way on the other end, I guess is how I would say it.
The presupposition in this argument is that the vaccine is the one binary function that ought to be determining whether if somebody can fit into society in an affable way.
Well, I mean, prior infection, I guess, would work too if you were already infected.
Oh, okay. No, I think that's a step away from the extremity, which is great. And again, I'm not arguing that I know what truth is, but from my perspective, that would be a step away from extremity. Would you say, okay, we've got natural infection, which has been proven to be fucking between 6 and 27 times more strong? I don't know how the fuck they got those numbers so outrageously different. But definitely...
Wait, to be clear, natural immunity, to my understanding, for the largest studies published, is a little bit worse than where the mRNA vaccines are. It is absolutely not 6 to 27.
Wow,
I would my entire net worth, EV plus, I know that bet I would win on that. It is not 6 to 27 times more strong.
There's like 120 studies out saying different.
So if you're telling me that there are 120 studies out saying different, what you're telling me is you've got a website that's listing a whole bunch of shoddy preprints that haven't been peer reviewed or published. That absolutely means that. There's not 120 studies that say that natural immunity is 6 to 27 times more strong than the vaccines. That is absolutely not the case.
They're not obviously not all saying 6 to 27, but there's 120 plus studies that shout the benefits of natural immunity being better than vaccinated. I don't know specifically if it's better than vaccinated immunity or if it's only a subsection of them. There's 120 studies about natural immunity, and the what I've seen from the scientists, what I've seen from fucking thousands of scientists, is that it's superior to natural.
Absolutely not thousands. There's probably like 2 or 3 that are making the round. It's probably like Brett Weinstein, the Robert Malone guy, and the other guy. It's like 3 or 4, not thousands. And then there's some weird Canadian guy. It's definitely not thousands. It's a few really popular ones that are all making a lot of money, making the rounds on the shows, giving this particular hot take. But
so just in the Unity project alone, I think it's 16,000 doctors who are saying explicitly that children and previously infected people should not be mandated to take these vaccines.
Previously infected people, probably not, if for no other reason because politically it plays better. Although there are weird things you get into there when you say if you're previously infected, you're okay. For children, they're just still waiting for the outcomes on a lot of the research on the younger people. But it seems more and more data we collect, it seems like getting vaccinated as a child is fine.
No, but the argument that I'm making is that there's something like 16,000 scientists and medical professionals that are saying.
Let's say that I believed that immediately, and I said that was true.
You can literally just Google search the Unity projects. And
sure, yeah. Let's say that I immediately believed that. If there are only 16,000 and there are millions on the other side, why would I believe the 16,000?
No, I'm not saying you should, but your argument was that there aren't thousands that are supporting the idea of natural immunity being superior than.
Gotcha. And also let me be very clear because we're having it might be the case that for some of the variants, natural immunity might be slightly better. That might be the case, but 6 to 27 times better? Absolutely not. It might be the case that it's comparable to or slightly better than vaccine immunity. Although I imagine it's going to vary on the vaccine or the series you got, but like massively better? Absolutely not. And for the original virus before the variants came out, I think that the largest studies were saying that, the vaccines were doing slightly better, or at least the Moderna and I think the Pfizer were. Just to be ultra crisp.
Somebody in chat fact check me on this. But didn't the CDC recently come out and say the natural immunity was superior to vaccinated immunity?
It might be the case now with like Delta and then with Omicron. It might be that natural immunity. But again, even if it is, it's going to be slightly better. It's not going to be 6 to 27 times better. There's no way.
I mean, there are definitely studies that say up to 27. Like the Israeli study said, I think between 7 and 23 or something like that. That's many.
Oh, sure. There might be some out there, but in terms of like peer reviewed. Yeah,
it's a good study. It had 700,000 people involved in it, and they got some pretty fucking good data because Israel's so. Very intense about how they collect medical data. It's obvious that we're on different sides of the internet here, and from my side, I follow a lot of doctors. I follow a lot of doctors and see what they say, and it's not even debated about which ones.
Yeah, but like, why would we care what individual doctors say? I just don't understand that.
It's not individual doctors. Like I said, it's a huge number of doctors.
Why would I care about what why wouldn't I just see like, well, what does the research say? Like a doctor is not necessarily a researcher publishing studies.
Wait. I assume that we can at least give them some charitable explanation or some charitable lens to look through and say that they're probably looking at the data in ways that you and I can't comprehend. And I'm not saying that means they're right.
I would never say that. Absolutely not.
Huh?
I think that doctors can be prone to all the same like biases that we as individuals have. I would always look to researchers before like just doctors saying things.
Yeah, of course. But these are researchers, these are epidemiologists, these are a lot of people that are saying the same thing.
Well, sure. But if they're researchers and they can publish.
There are Harvard professors, there are Cambridge professors, Oxford professors, all saying the same fucking things. And I'm not saying that means that they're right, but they're a lot better at understanding data than you or me. So I mean, to go with 100% certainty that natural immunity is worse than vaccinated immunity seems a bit.
Wait, hold on. To be clear, I never said that natural immunity was worse, or I might have said that in the beginning that the early studies showed it. It might be the case that it's better. I just don't think it's like massively better. It's not like overshadowing it so much. And even if it was better, and even if it was massively better, the first time you contract the coronavirus, if you aren't vaccinated, you're still not working with any immunity at all. But I mean, maybe later on, I guess I can dig through studies. I can look and see if it's changed with Omicron or Delta. My understanding is that the vaccines are still incredibly effective at dealing with it.
I'll send you the list of 120 studies, and it might turn out that it's the other way around. But from what I've heard, that it's kind of the immunology 101 that natural immunity has always been the best kind of immunity for these kind of viruses.
Why?
I'm not a scientist. I don't know. This is me parroting people who understand science a lot.
Okay, well, I thought you said what happened to the thousands of hours of research.
Dude, I could spend 1,000 hours researching microbiology, and I'll still be pretty fucking bad at microbiology.
Okay, I'll just utter some bullshit and then you can fact check it later, or you can check, because I am curious, I guess. So when the vaccines initially came out, a lot of people in my fan base were asking me like, oh, like, do you think the vaccines are going to be better than natural immunity? Do you think the vaccines are going to be better than natural immunity? And my response was, it seems to be the case that when you get infected with an actual virus, there's like 5 or 6 different proteins on the outside that your body can train against, versus if you get a vaccine, you're only getting to train against that spike protein. So it would seem to me to be logically, I hate saying that word, but logically it seems like a natural infection would give you more immunity because your body can train against all of the proteins instead of just the spike protein that the mRNA vaccines get. So that was my stance initially. Like, so the natural immunity is probably always going to be a little bit better than the vaccine immunity just because you get so much more to train against. But then data against the very first coronavirus, not Delta or Omicron, but the data from the first one started to come out, and it seemed to be the case that the vaccine immunity wasn't actually or was outperforming the natural immunity, and that seemed to be logically impossible. I don't understand why that happened. And what I had was
vaccines when the first one was running rampant.
Yes, I believe the early studies that came out said that the natural immunity was slightly underperforming, not massively, but was slightly underperforming the vaccines.
Wait, what timeline are we talking about? Because the vaccine rollout was in fucking January 2021.
I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't remember the timelines. I'm gonna be totally honest. The whole past like 2 years have gone by as a blur to me, so I don't remember the timelines. But I do know that there were large studies in the beginning, maybe even published in Nature, that show that the vaccine immunity was naturally outperforming the natural immunity. Vaccine was naturally outperforming. And the explanation that I was given, because I've got a lot of people that are educated or whatever, email me and shit, and the explanation I was given was that while it might be the case that a natural infection allows your body to train against a lot more proteins, it might be the case that just focusing on one protein is going to give you a more effective vaccine response, because your vaccine creating antibodies for other proteins isn't as effective as targeting like the one spike protein that a pathogen uses to enter a cell. So when I was given that explanation, I was like, oh, okay, I guess it makes sense then why maybe a vaccine that targets one spike protein might be better than a vaccine that targets 5 or 6 different proteins, because maybe targeting just one and making antibodies against just one is better than making antibodies against all sorts of them. That was the explanation I was given. So maybe you can fact check that. You can say it's true or not true, but
like neither you nor I have any fucking idea what you just said. Like, obviously I understand on a conceptual level, but it's such an incomplete data set that we have.
Wait, hold on. Okay, hold on. I'm not going to equate the knowledge. No, I'm sorry. I'll get more specific, okay? When you get infected with SARS-CoV-2, the virus, there is one particular protein in the virus that uses the ACE2 receptor on the membranes of your cells to gain access to your cells. When you get an mRNA vaccine, correct. When you get the mRNA vaccines, okay, the mRNA that's injected into your cells is using your ribosomes to create that one spike protein that's being used to gain access to your cells. So the biomolecular explanation for why maybe the vaccine was outperforming natural immunity at the beginning is because if your body is creating antibodies against that one spike protein, it's going to be more effective than creating antibodies against the 5 or 6 different proteins in the membrane of this virus, because attacking some of the other proteins might not inhibit the virus from reaching your cell and actually infecting you. So in that case, training against one particular thing, maybe you find that you're getting burglared and there are cars, and on these cars, all of them have machine guns at the front, and like all of them are also red and blue, and some of them have 4 tires and some of them have huge tires. It might be the case of saying, let's only target the cars with machine guns is a more effective way of keeping criminals out of your city than let's target cars that are also red or blue or have big tires or small tires. That was the explanation I was given for saying why just targeting the spike protein might be more effective than a natural immune response where you're targeting all sorts of different proteins that may or may not like actually prevent the virus from entering your cells. That was the explanation I was given. Now, that may or may not be true, but you can't just say like, oh, well, we will have no idea what we're talking about. I was given a lot of explanations, and I've done a lot of research into this as well. So maybe that ended up not being the case with some of the variants for a variety of reasons, but that was the explanation that I was given.
So this is one of the reasons why I'm very dubious about kind of running into the minutiae of microbiology without having decades of experience in microbiology. Neither of us have any idea if what you said is relevant to what we're trying to figure out. This is why you and I have to speak about the macros. I agree that what you said sounds reasonable, but if then some other scientist or some like hypothetical, logically infallible alien species said, well, what about this other thing, which completely turns the equation on its head and makes it so natural immunity is more effective, like, yeah, okay, I didn't know that either. You know, so if we have an incomplete data set, there's no point us just fucking running over the minutiae of different T cells and B cells and all of these things. Like,
and I agree with you. It might be the case that a microbiologist emails both of us and it's like, well, Destiny was totally wrong. Training against multiple proteins actually doesn't affect anything at all. The body will make things regardless, right? That might be, and then everything I just said was irrelevant. The only reason I brought this up is because it seemed like initially you were like, well, isn't it just common sense or whatever? Doesn't it just make sense that natural immunity would always be better than vaccine immunity? Okay, it sounded like you were making it sound like it seems like that would almost obviously be the case. But regardless, if you said initially, well, we need like to rely on the data set, I would also agree with that. But then I would ask, well, why are you going by what some collection of doctors are saying rather than just like what the published studies or researchers themselves are saying?
Yeah, and this is, so first of all, I definitely didn't say it was common sense, because this is something that is completely non-intuitive to the human brain, because we intuitively don't understand the microorganism world. Secondly, that's all we have to do. We have to look at the macros. We have to say, okay, these scientists are saying X, these scientists are saying Y. Let's see how much we can trust the data they're saying. Let's see how honest we think they're being. Let's say if there are any, what's the word when they have bad incentives. I forgot what it's called. But
perverse incentives or?
Yeah, something like that. They have to declare they don't have something before anyway.
Conflict of interest.
Yeah, let's say we have to analyze that, and then we have to analyze how honest we think they're being, get some fucking poker reads in there. You know, it's a multivariate analysis that you and I have to make, that everybody has to make to decide who we believe and who we don't believe. And I think that that's the best way to try and determine what's the highest likelihood of being true. There are also different ways that you could perhaps tap into truth, but more spiritual ways, but I won't go into because we'll fucking disagree on that until the sun goes down. But I think that it's not so black and white and saying, okay, like I've heard the scientists say this, so I think this is true. But anyway, getting aside that, I think we're getting a bit lost in the weeds here. I really want to pin down exactly where your line is about this totalitarian stuff. Let's say if you really don't
so we can do the totalitarian thing. I would be fine with this. I'm totally fine with that. I guess just on a macro level on the last thing, I agree that it's good to be skeptical over who we listen to, who we trust. The only thing that bothers me is that like sometimes people say like we should absolutely be skeptical of who we trust, and that's fine, and I agree with that. And they'll be like, pharmaceuticals have perverse incentives because they're just trying to sell you a drug. Okay, fine. The government might have perverse incentives because they're trying to make their administrations look good, win re-elections. Okay, fine. But then when it comes to looking at like the alternative media, it's like, oh no, well these guys are the truth sayers. I believe them. Or like this one doctor that says, I've got the cure. It's like, oh yeah, he's absolutely being truthful. Like I wish that same skepticism was levied at all sides and not just at mainstream sources and then totally left by the wayside when it comes to alternative media sources. That's what it feels sometimes. Not necessarily saying you're doing it, but it feels like a lot of people kind of engage in that sometimes. That they'll be hypercritical of all official sources, but Joe Rogan is like the beacon of truth,
I agree, and I'm getting some insight into the kind of people that you're used to speaking to, and I think that the tribal right are just as bad as the tribal left, or maybe one's worse than the other. Who knows?
Sure.
I think people tend to be have extreme double standards. But okay, so going
the totalitarian thing, yeah.
Because I think that this is, for me, it's the main thing, that if we can kind of get together and just put this fucking like stop loss in society and say, okay, if there is a virus that's going to kill 80% of people unless you get vaccinated, everyone should get vaccinated. I'm with you on that. And then on the other side, if we happen to be encroaching on an unprecedented global totalitarian world, perhaps we should put a line in the sand and say this is where everyone's going to stand up to it. So even if you're not going to stand up for Austria, not Australia, but Austria, the country in European country where they're fining people for being unvaccinated, if that were then brought to America, can I get you on stream to say that if they try to imprison people just for being unvaccinated with a virus that is relatively undeadly in comparison to if it were the Black Plague or whatever, then would you stand up and say this is completely wrong, and I will speak out against this until?
Yeah, no, I don't think I would. So the key part here is you're using the word totalitarian. So totalitarian implies a sort of dictatorship that is undemocratic. If it was the case that an administration, retained democratic support, that the majority of the people in the society thought that this particular thing was right to do, and the government draws its power from the people, then I would say the government has absolutely the right to do that, assuming that the people are supporting the government, Now, if it came down to like only 20% of people supported something and the government was doing this like through an actual like totalitarian mean where they were ignoring democratic support or whatever, then I would come out against it. But insofar as the people in society who live in that society are voting to run that society in a certain way to keep themselves all safe and healthy, and it's democratically done, I would say, well, I think they have the right to do that, and that is their right. But then it comes up to them to figure out like what are those individual risks for society, like where are they willing to draw the line, I guess.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Go for it.
So first of all, we're not living in a society where every single policy is made by referendum. We have a democratically elected party, but it's kind of a faux democracy, as I'm sure you would agree to.
I absolutely don't agree with that, but go ahead.
Right. So you think that say, for instance, the constant warmongering is something that the vast majority of Americans would agree with?
I think that the biggest problem with the American system is I think that it's actually incredibly effective. And I think that you do see the genuine opinions of the American people show up in government so much, and that is where a lot of the problems come from. So I do think the warmongering is, I think people are...
The vast majority of people are against, for instance, going to war, but the government still starts intervening in foreign policy.
I don't think that's true at all. I think that if like Israel was attacked by a country tomorrow, I think like 80% of Americans would be like, we need troops on the fucking ground right now to protect that country. After 9/11, like the United States, every citizen would have gone to war with fucking Antarctica. If Bush had pointed that out on the map, I think everybody would have been ready to go to war with something. And I think that you actually see this. Sure.
You might be right.
I think as like a proof of that, I think something that's interesting is that when you look at like the strategies of terrorist organizations, they usually know that the United States draws its power from its people, and the goal is usually just to outlast the public support for a war, because they know that if they do that, then slowly the United States will have to withdraw support for that war because they just can't sustain it democratically.
Okay, so fair enough. I'm not as clued up on the United States democracy as you are, so I'm not going to try and argue that. So the next point I would make is let's say hypothetically, for instance, the Biden administration puts out this huge propaganda machine that convinces people that anybody that sits behind a computer, drinks Red Bull, and streams for a living ought to be put in jail. And 80% of the population agrees with it because you're a danger to society for XYZ. Would you then say, okay, well, that's just part of the democratic election, people agree with it, so I'm not going to stand up for my rights to not go to jail?
Assuming that there is a world where I would be on board with that. I'm gonna be charitable. I'm assuming you're meaning this and not like any weird catch-all way or like gotcha ways. But yeah, there is a world where I would be okay with that. Yeah, I think so. Like I think a real life comparison is, I want to say, I don't know if this is real or this is just me on the internet, but I think in Japan, they started measuring your waistline, and if you were above certain measurements, I think you had to pay a fine or something for it, either at the workplace or to the government. Have you ever heard this before? Is this?
I've not.
Okay. In a society where you're like societally enforcing those types of things, I could actually see it, sure. Because I mean, like when you are overweight, you are like a greater burden on society in a variety of ways. And if this is something that we're all like publicly voting for, we all agree on it, and then we're all kind of bought into it, I could see that being the case. Yeah.
So just to reiterate, in case I misunderstood, you would say that you could see a world where if the Biden administration put out intense propaganda against streamers who are criticizing them, for instance.
Well, hold on. Criticizing the government. Now we're getting in a totally different area.
Okay. So let's just say that for some reason that they believe that streamers are a danger to society. They convince 80% of the American population that streamers are a danger, and the American population strongly agrees, mostly agrees, that you deserve to be in a jail. Even though you haven't, in your opinion, done anything wrong, hopefully. You're saying that just to reiterate what you're saying, you were saying that you could see a world where you would be okay with that.
No. Okay. I might have missed something out of the first thing you said. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about like exercise mandates for people, because you mentioned like drinking Red Bull all day or whatever. Was that not in the original thing you said?
No.
Oh, okay. No, just locking somebody up just because you think they're a danger to society when there's no actual data or evidence that they are. No, I don't think there's any world where I'd be okay with that.
Okay, so then to tie that back to what you were saying before about you would support something because the vast majority of people believe it, does that not contradict what you said?
No, if the vast majority of people believe something that has to do with like that, like a data-driven health and safety thing in society, I think is like the important thing. There has to be the numbers to support what they're believing. Otherwise, people could just say black people are a danger to society, so we should lock all them up, and then they do it, right?
Right, but so your point that saying you said that you're not going to stick up for the rights. You can't see yourself sticking up for the rights of unvaccinated people if the vast majority of the majority of the population agrees that they ought to be in jail, or because the majority of people believe they're going to be in jail. Mm-hmm. That only stands if you agree with the policy yourself. Is that true?
Assuming the policy is a data-driven policy, yeah. So if it was the case that unvaccinated people were massively overrepresented in disease transmission or a hospital occupation or something like that, yeah.
Okay, so it follows that you agree that unvaccinated people should be in jail then?
Well, it follows that I would support a society if they made that decision, but I don't know if I personally would make that decision.
You would only support it if the data supported it too. So you're saying that you agree that the data do support the unvaccinated people belong in jail?
Being in jail? Well... Whether or not the unvaccinated people should be in... So the data has to support the drive for why you would do it. So is there data, for instance, that like unvaccinated people represent a greater harm in society than vaccinated people? That seems to be the case. There is the data. So it would support like the drive for the policy. But now in terms of like what is the best thing to do? Is it fining them? Is it jailing them? Is it prohibiting them from like certain places? That's like a policy. That's like a social, ethical decision that I don't know. That can't come 100% from the data. But I guess if people decided that like they would lock somebody up in jail for it, I could see a world where I could agree with that, yeah. Although that's getting like really on the extreme part of it, right? Like shooting somebody for being unvaccinated, that's like way, way, way on the other extreme. But in things of like you're prohibited from being in certain workplaces or like public areas, I'm probably more warm to that idea.
Okay, so just to reiterate, so I can completely understand your position.
Go for it.
There's something along the lines of you support it more if the vast majority or if the majority of people agree with a certain policy. There was something there. I don't understand exactly how it works. Secondly, if you believe that the policy is data-driven, then you would support it to a certain extent. But you were saying that there's some kind of line where you wouldn't shoot people. So you're saying that you do agree that unvaccinated people could belong in jail for not being vaccinated. If you're also saying that you wouldn't speak out against this happening in your country.
Oh God. Okay. The problem is that it's so loaded on so many different levels. So whether or not I would or wouldn't speak out against something wouldn't. Hold on. Let's try to peel away this so I can get to like the essence of what you're asking. We're only going to talk about this on a moral level, right? Not like on a politically effective level. Yeah.
What do you mean politically effective? Sorry.
Well, so like for instance, I'm opposed to vaccine mandates, and it has nothing to do with policy or health. It's just because it's super politically unpopular. But that's probably a boring part. You don't care about that, right? You're not asking about that. That's not the essence of your question, yeah.
No.
Yeah. So okay. So getting away from all the like, is it politically effective? Will you win or lose elections? Okay. So I'm going to try to restate your question so that I can understand this, and then I can tackle it. So you're asking me. So let's say the data existed that showed that unvaccinated people were a greater threat to society than vaccinated people, and then let's say that those people voted democratically. That if you weren't vaccinated, if you're an unvaccinated person, that you have to either pay a fine or go to jail. Would you support a society making that decision? That's essentially what you're asking me, yeah?
No.
No. Okay.
That was kind of the web that you wove. What I said is, will you support or will you go against unvaccinated people in the current society that we have going to jail if the government enacted the policy? Then you said you wouldn't go against it. You wouldn't tweet out and say no, this is wrong. But if that, for instance, the majority of people said that that's what they wanted, and then you added the caveat, and if the data showed that were the case. So what I'm trying to ask is, where's your line in the totalitarian spectrum of where you will stand up for the rights of people who are unvaccinated? Is it purely when they're going to be shot in the head, or is there something before that?
Where would I stand up for the rights of the unvaccinated? Assuming society, I don't know if from an ethical level, assuming it had popular support, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it a lot.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think it's a really, really important thing for a lot of people to have to think about. And I think it's a good answer that you don't know, because, unless you have thought about it a lot, it's a fucking hard decision to make because there's so many variables and there's so many things. But I would ask, please do. Because
I understand that, but like nobody cares about the unvaccinated side of this question. Like the other side opposed to the mandates will say over and over again, well, think about this. But then on the other end, you're like, okay, what about these people that are just like, for absolutely no reason, running around, like essentially like being bioterror labs and harboring viruses potentially affecting other people, whatever. Like, and it's so easy to just get vaccinated. Like, what about these people? It's like, well, these people are special. They're special children and they need to be protected, and we need to be like making concessions to them. I think it's an important question to figure out, like, where's the line? I haven't thought about it much because we're not really at that part in the United States yet, especially now with the OSHA mandate getting kicked by the Supreme Court. So I haven't really thought about it that much. But I don't know. It just seems like people only ever like hyperanalyze one side of it.
I'd like to think that I've hyperanalyzed to an unhealthy extent both sides of it. But no, I completely understand that there's a lot of tribal stuff happening. But I know it's a very divisive thing to say, but if we compare it to some kind of past fascistic or totalitarian regime in history, let's say, for instance, Nazis, and by the way, if anyone says don't compare those two things, comparison is not equation. It's completely okay to compare Gandhi and Hitler, as long as you don't say that they're the same thing. So if we look back at how totalitarianism took over, or fascism took over in Nazi Germany, it started very small. It started with Jews aren't allowed to sit on the same bench as non-Jews. And everyone's like, I don't know if I agree with that, but whatever, if the majority of people are up for it, or if they're saying it, I'm not gonna stand up for it. And this is how totalitarianism creeps in. It takes an inch, it takes an inch, it takes an inch, and then when people start resisting, it relaxes a bit. And I'm actually just fucking quoting Jordan Peterson, which I probably drive you crazy here, but I've read about totalitarianism and it's true, and what I would like everyone to think about is, where's the line in the sand? Even if you think every single person on this earth, man, child, baby, everything, should be vaccinated, where's the point in which you're going to stick up for these people if the government overreaches too much?
I'm not sure, because I don't like the comparison. I love Hitler comparisons and rape comparisons. I'm all about like hyperbolic comparisons. But the only reason why I don't really like the comparison is because I don't think the Jewish people are analogous to unvaccinated people, because unvaccinated people represent like not a theoretical harm, but an actual harm to society. So I think it's a little bit different. Like if Jewish people were actually harming society, there might be like good reasons to restrict the ways in which they can enact those harms. So I think it's a little bit different in that. I don't like the argument. I'm thinking of a word. I'm not to be too aggressive with it, but I feel like it's a little intellectually lazy to be like, every time the government does something, we're creeping towards totalitarianism. Like that kind of like alarmist language doesn't really get us very far in a conversation, and you could literally use it for everything. Like it's fascism when the government tells me that I have to have like a 3-point safety belt. It's fascism when the government tells me that I can't smoke indoors anymore. Like I'm basically a Jewish person in an outdoor concentration camp smoking in the cold. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not as concerned with like the creeping towards authoritarianism when we're talking about like public health measures. I don't know if people thought about it during like the Spanish flu or during measles or whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
So I can understand that you're not as worried as I am about totalitarianism, but let's play a hypothetical game and just say that I'm right. Let's say that I'm right about everything I've said, which isn't true. You know, I'm going to be wrong about it. But let's say that I'm right. And there is a global march intentionally, nefariously towards totalitarianism, that bureaucrats, billionaires, and people in power are so corrupt to the core that they wish to encroach on the rights of individuals, and they don't mind how many people die in the process. Let's say that is a possibility. Now, I would hope that everybody in the world at some point would stand up and say, okay, this is too far. This is too far. So if you could play that hypothetical game with me and say that there is some nefarious plotting and corruption to walk towards a huge increasing of power and destruction, and that would lead to perhaps people being put in quarantine camps within the United States, could you then find your line in the sand and say, okay, if they're going to be put in quarantine camps, I'm going to make that tweet. I'm going to stand up and say, fuck this. These people aren't so much of a harm to society. I mean, everyone's a harm to some extent. You just have to kind of work out what degree they are and what degree they're not. These people as a demographic, varying in different harms depending on their stratifications, do not belong in prison. They're human beings that aren't hurting other people to an extent that is worthy of putting them in prison. So in that hypothetical universe, could you say that, okay, I'm going to say fucking no to putting these people in prison?
I feel like in that world, I would, but I feel like I actually wouldn't care at that point about the actual actions of the government. I'd feel like I would care more about like the motivation for the actions. So like, for instance, let's say there was a world where this virus did exist and it had like a 50% mortality rate and it lay dormant for a month after you infected or something. Like at that point, I'd probably be in favor of the government showing up to shoot people if they didn't get vaccinated. Cause it's like, bro, like everybody's going to fucking die. Like society's literally going to end. I'm sorry, like this is what has to happen. But let's say there is a society where we have like the flu is probably not at that point, right? And let's say that the government said like, okay, well listen, I'm trying not to make this sound like the Nazi, but let's say the government's like, if you're not going to be vaccinated, you have to wear like a special little I could have the flu badge or whatever in society, something like that. Sure. No, let's say an octahedron, okay? Make it not like, okay, right? Even though that action is way less severe than the shooting people for not getting vaccinated, I would probably be opposed to that action just because the incentive for it seems like it would be way different. So I feel like I wouldn't really focus on the action itself for worrying if the action was bad. I'd worry more about where it was coming from. So if I did have the feeling that there was some like worldwide movement or conspiracy, when I say conspiracy, I mean like a plan, like a plotted plan between different groups to move in a different direction, I think I would be opposed to almost all of those actions. I don't even think I would care what the action itself is. Did that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
My head's getting a little fuzzy because it's a little late. So from my perspective, I still believe that it's extraordinarily important in the current reality that we're in, hypotheticals aside, for every single person to say, okay, if unvaccinated people with the current virus that we have, with Omicron or whatever thing's going to be next, if it's got a similar IFR, if they start getting rounded up and putting in prisons, or if they start having to wear badges, or if they start getting no Medicare, or if they start getting no ICU space, this is where I will draw the line. And I would consider I would love to ask somebody to make that, to say that out loud, like the line is going to be here. Because what's happened over the last couple of years is that the Overton window of what's acceptable and how it's acceptable to treat different human beings based on vaccination status has changed dramatically from how it was a couple of years ago. And I see that from my perspective, you don't have to agree with me. I see it getting worse and worse and worse, the demonization of people who are unvaccinated. So I would love to hear you say publicly, if they do X, then I'm going to stand up for them in the current universe that we live in.
It's hard because it depends on how severe things get in the future. I always try to figure out, like, how can what?
Let's say it's Omicron.
Yeah, but I mean, like, as it stands right now, like, the line is at, like, I don't even know if we should prevent people from going to work, because it seems so far, I don't know if it's going to be the case, but it seems so far that it's a milder infection than the other variants. I don't know if this is worth shutting down so much of the economy. And even the CDC seems to agree. That's why they changed the isolation time from 10 days down to 5 or whatever. So in that case, I wouldn't support anything. But if it came to where, like, hospitals were starting to hit this, like, 100% mark, I think that the issue is, and we always ask for empathy for the unvaccinated. It's always like empathy for the unvaccinated, empathy. Like, if you've got somebody that's taken, like, appropriate measures in their life and they've done most of what they could to stay safe and healthy, and, you know, they have to go to the hospital for some reason, and they can't get medical treatment because it's, like, fucking overran by people that are unvaccinated and sick with the coronavirus. It's hard not to have empathy for that person who's like, wait, well, this is bullshit. I pay taxes, I pay my insurance, and I can't access scarce medical resources because these people watched, you know, too many episodes of Joe Rogan or Tim Pool, and now I'm not going to get medical treatment, right? I think it's okay to ask for empathy for the people on the other side of that who are like, fuck me, like we have scarce medical resources. Why should they be doled out equally in this sense when it was so easy to avoid going to the hospital from the coronavirus? That would be, like, the empathy I would look for on the other side.
2 points. One, I actually really love Joe Rogan. I've got a special place in my heart for him.
Sure.
Secondly, how about from the flip side? How about if it's somebody like me? You know, I haven't had any of the mRNA vaccines, I haven't had any of the COVID-19 vaccines. I've got all the other vaccines that society has recommended that I get. I even got some flu shots. You know, back in 2007, I probably wouldn't do it again, judging from what I've learned about flu shots. But I'd still get fucking, you know, if the new variant of tetanus came out, I'd be like, fuck yeah, jab me up, bro. But and additional to that, I also look after my body. I exercise all the fucking time. I meditate all the fucking time. I eat as clean as I can. I keep my body in really, really good shape. Now, let's say I get to an ICU and the hospitals are kind of filling up with other people, vaccinated and unvaccinated. But let's say it's a high proportion of unvaccinated people that are inside the hospitals, and, you know, the triage unit or the triage is faced with a decision between a person that's fat and barely exercises or doesn't exercise apart from, like, to get up to go to the computer, eats like shit, all of the unhealthy things, but has got this COVID-19 vaccine. Would you have then empathy for me if the government turned around and said, no, Charlie, you're not allowed in our ICU because you haven't got this vaccine? Let's say I turned up with a fucking, like, gun wound or something. Nothing to do with coronavirus.
Nothing to do with the coronavirus.
Yeah, my specific illness isn't.
How does it connect to this? If you're coming in for with nothing related to the coronavirus, yeah?
So you just painted a situation where the ICU beds were filling up based on the COVID rates going up and things like that. Let's say we're in that universe where that's happening, but personally, I've taken all the measures, bar the vaccine, to stop myself from getting COVID. I've taken prophylactic ivermectin, I've meditated, etc.
Why does that matter though? If it's just a gunshot, I guess. Or that's what I'm not understanding.
What I'm saying is that if we have this blanket policy of we treat the vaccinated before we treat the unvaccinated in an ICU bed, then they would prioritize that person that's perhaps.
Oh, sure. Hold on. Wait. I'm sorry. Yeah. Hold on. I'm sorry. Let me be more clear. I don't know if this sounds like a weasel or not. When that thought experiment was proposed, that was exclusively for people that were infected with the coronavirus. It wouldn't be like somebody. Yeah. Go ahead.
Fair enough. I misunderstood. So let's say I've got coronavirus.
Yeah. Sure.
Got some new pi variant or whatever.
I mean, like, I would be sympathetic for sure, But I think it goes back to the original thing where I said, like, there are reasonable expectations I could expect people to take versus unreasonable ones. Like, a whole lifestyle change seems like so much more of a burden than just getting a vaccine. But, like, I would be empathetic on the other end. If you're, like, a relatively healthy person and then you go to an ICU and it's full with a bunch of people that are, like, super fat and overweight, and they're like, well, sorry, you can't come in because you're not vaccinated. And you're like, okay, well, what about all these other people that are overweight and dying just because they couldn't make lifestyle changes? Like, I would be empathetic. That would suck. But I guess, like, my question would be like, well, why didn't you just get vaccinated? What the fuck? Why would you do everything except for, like, literally probably the most important thing for increasing your odds of surviving the virus?
Because I disagree with that. It's the most important thing to increase my odds of surviving a virus. Like, I would bet my entire net worth giving 3 to 1 that it's less likely that I die from coronavirus than you die from coronavirus. I don't think I could die from this virus if I tried. I went around licking every single ill patient I found. My body is just in such good shape that I had coronavirus twice, and once in the wave where it was the most severe in Delta, and I didn't notice. I played my B game in high stakes poker. And I'm not trying to, like, fucking say I'm the fucking best, because there's a lot of people out there that have very awesome immune systems that because of that have made their own risk benefit analysis and said, okay, I don't think that this vaccine is going to do me any good because my fucking immune system's so good anyway. What I would say is, like, if we create a blanket COVID policy that's binary and says we're only going to prioritize people that have been vaccinated over those that have been unvaccinated, I think that leads to a de-individualization of the people. It takes people like me and says, well, you're just exactly the same as people that just don't give a shit about the health system. You made a stupid decision. And to me, it seems really, really, it's not psychopathic in intention, but it's psychopathic in outcome.
I disagree with this calling it psychopathic. I feel like, and I run into this so much with people in these arguments, it feels like you only look at empathy on one side of things. I guess that's what I don't understand.
I've got empathy for every fucking disgusting human being in the world.
Well, but, like, it doesn't seem to be the case that, like, when our ICUs are filling with, like, unvaccinated people, and then you run into the potentiality of somebody not being able to get medical treatment because unvaccinated people are filling up ICUs, it just seems like the most selfish thing in the world.
In your opinion, if you think that the vaccines are making these things work, but if you look at the UK data, then it's actually completely different. And
I don't think that's true in the UK, to be clear, but
no, it is.
You think in the UK, you think that that you're more likely to be hospitalized if you're vaccinated versus if you're unvaccinated?
No, but the differential is very dramatic in comparison to the US. I actually have a video that I could pull up that kind of a scientist, the editor of BMJ, elucidates on this a little bit. It'd be interesting to see your reaction to it, actually.
What is that, or what are you saying? I'm sorry, could you rephrase that way, or I just don't understand?
So the data between the UK vaccinated versus unvaccinated people in ICUs versus the US is dramatically different, and I would question why, and perhaps there's some data manipulation happening.
Oh wait, that you think there are more vaccinated people in ICUs in the UK versus in the US?
Yeah, and there's actually more vaccinated people in hospital in the UK than there are unvaccinated. But
sure. What is the vaccination rate in the UK?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's really important. That's like paramount. That's like the most important part.
I'm not making an argument that unvaccinated people have a better chance of surviving COVID than vaccinated. I'm not making that argument. By the way, I would love to play this 5-minute video for you if. I don't know how. Maybe I could send it to you.
If you want to, yeah, you can send it to me. Fuck it, sure, why not?
Whilst I go get a snack, because my brain's getting fuzzy from hunger. And I would like to get your reaction to it at some point. So this, can you just drag and drop into?
Just copy the URL and then paste it into the Discord message box.
It's an actual video. I have to get up on my Twitter. You think Twitter's plus or minus EV for your mental health?
For me, plus, but for most people, definitely minus.
Yeah, same answer for me.
If stuff is, like, bothering you once you've logged off, if you're, like, thinking about it a lot or it's causing you a lot of severe mental distress, then it's probably time to cut that thing out of your life, I think. So, like, Twitter is fun to shitpost on and fight with people, but, like, when I log off Twitter, I'm done with Twitter. I'm not, like, thinking about it constantly. Now, League of Legends that's a negative EV thing on my mental health. That's a far different, more insidious monster.
The thing I'm sending is a 3-part that I posted to Twitter. I'd like to see what your reaction is to it. Whilst I go get some food.
Okay. I'll watch this for a sec, I guess, while you're.
Yeah, I've seen it, so I'll know what you're going to say about it.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Peter Doshi. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland and editor at the BMJ. I have no relevant conflicts of interest, and my comments today are my own. In pharmacy school, I teach a required course on how to critically appraise the medical literature. We train students on how to go beyond a study abstract and start to pick apart and critically assess biomedical studies, not just take them at face value. I want to use my 5 minutes here to harness that spirit of critical thinking. I'm saddened that we are supersaturated as a society right now in the attitude of everybody knows that has shut down intellectual curiosity and led to self-censorship. So let me start with a few everybody knows examples that I'm not sure we should be so certain about. Everybody knows that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. But if hospitalizations and deaths were almost exclusively occurring in the unvaccinated, why would booster shots be necessary? Or why would the statistics be so different in the UK, where most COVID hospitalizations and deaths are among the fully vaccinated, as Senator Johnson said? There's a disconnect there. There's something to be curious about.
If you want to watch. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm just listening. Hold on, sorry. Go ahead.
We can't hear it on this stream, so.
Gotcha. Okay, going back to listening.
There's a disconnect there. There's something to be curious about. There's something not adding up, and we should all be asking, is it true that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated? What does that even mean? Next slide, please. Then there's this. Everybody knows that COVID vaccines save lives. In fact, we've known this from early 2021. The clinical trials proved that to be the case, as you can see here in the quote of a February article in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But is it true? When that statement by prominent public health officials was penned, there had been just one death across the 70,000 Pfizer and Moderna trial participants. Today we have more data, and you can see that there were similar numbers of deaths in the vaccine and placebo groups. The trials did not show a reduction in death. Even for COVID deaths, as opposed to other causes, the evidence is flimsy, with just 2 deaths in the placebo group versus 1 in the vaccine group. My point is not that I know the truth about what the vaccine can and cannot do. My point is that those who claimed the trials showed the vaccines were highly effective in saving lives were wrong. The trials did not demonstrate this. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about anti-vaxxers. Everybody knows you should discount what anti-vaxxers have to say. But what does the term mean? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as, quote, a person who opposes the use of vaccines or regulations mandating vaccination. The first part of the definition, I expected. The second part stunned me. There are entire countries from the United Kingdom to Japan which do not mandate childhood vaccines. Both achieve high levels of vaccination, just not through regulations mandating vaccines. There are no mandates there, and I would wager that a large minority, perhaps a majority of the world's population meets the definition here of an anti-vaxxer. Definition worth checking is vaccine. Next slide, please. I am one of the academics that argues that these mRNA products, which everybody calls vaccines, are qualitatively different than standard vaccines. And so I found it fascinating to learn that Merriam-Webster changed its definition of vaccine early this year. mRNA products did not meet the definition of vaccine that has been in place for 15 years at Merriam-Webster, but the definition was expanded such that mRNA products are now vaccines. I highlight this to ask a question. How would you feel about mandating COVID vaccines if we didn't call them vaccines? What if these injections were called drugs instead? So here's the scenario. We have this drug, and we have evidence that it doesn't prevent infection, nor does it stop viral transmission. But the drug is understood to reduce your risk of becoming very sick and dying of COVID. would you take a dose of this drug every 6 months or so for possibly the rest of your life? If that's what it took for the drug to stay effective? Would you not just take this drug yourself, but support regulations mandating that everybody else around you take this drug? Or would you say, hold on a sec. Maybe you'd say that if that's all the drug does, why not use a normal medicine instead? The kind we take when we're sick and want to get better. And why would you mandate it? The point is, just because we call it a vaccine doesn't mean we should assume these new products are just like all other childhood vaccines which get mandated. Each product is a different product, and if people are okay with mandating something simply because it's a vaccine and we mandate other vaccines, so why shouldn't we mandate this? I think it's time to inject some critical thinking into that conversation, and that is what I hope we're doing today. Thank you.
Okay. Are you here?
Yeah. Just a quick couple of things. First of all, chat, the worst thing that you can do is turn tribal towards each other. I usually have such a loving chat.
Yeah, a lot of people say that until I show up.
Yeah, we're usually so accepting of each other, but yeah, this is obviously an inflammatory topic. But the worst thing you can do, the stupidest thing you can do, is fall for the classic tribalistic warfare. Secondly, somebody in my chat said you're Aspergic. True.
Somebody in chat said I'm Aspergic?
Aspergic. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Asperger syndrome?
Oh, who, me or you?
You.
Did you say that it's true?
No. I said somebody in my chat said it's true. I was actually diagnosed with it as a kid. I was just wondering if we had that in common.
No, we don't have the Asperger's diagnosis anymore. It's all ASD, autism spectrum diseases, but it's all under here in the news. But I like to say I'm an undiagnosed Aspie going through society.
I think so.
Possibly. Okay. So I have I know that people have written responses to that, and I could read that to you. No, you're not interested?
I'm interested. I'd rather hear you first, at least.
So the way that people talk or the things that people point to really make me wonder their thought process. So there are some things in here that I wouldn't be able to counter because I just don't have the information on hand. But there are other things he says that makes me immediately not trust some of the other things that he's saying. So the whole, I don't know why. I would be so curious to talk to this guy. If you ever think you can bully him into coming on my stream, when he would say that why would booster shots be necessary if it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated? Because immunity wanes over time with anything, but that's true of natural immunity. That's true of vaccinated immunity. Like even on our normal vaccines, we get booster shots. So that question of why would booster shots be necessary is really weird. Maybe he's just saying, well, you're saying it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. It's probably because I think the unvaccinated had such higher rates per capita of showing up in hospitals. It doesn't just mean that only unvaccinated people are getting sick or only unvaccinated people can spread the disease. So that's a really weird, unless he's just fighting with strawmen on Twitter. I don't think educated people are saying that. Saying that fully vaccinated people in the UK are more likely to be dead, that may be true, but I thought that was because the UK vaccination rates are very, very, very high. Per capita number is a very important thing here. And there are other things to tease out in the UK data as well. So for instance, even early on in the UK data, this is my understanding, I may be wrong, but early on in the UK data, fully vaccinated people, even per capita, were more likely to die than unvaccinated people. And a lot of people were pointing to that and saying, like, well, look, these vaccines aren't even helping. But I think the reason why was because in the beginning of the pandemic, the UK was exclusively vaccinating people that were like 60 plus or were like highly at risk of dying. So that selection, that group of people were already massively overrepresented for deaths. The vaccine brought it down, but they're still more overrepresented than the normal, healthier population. The Pfizer vaccine trials, I don't know the picture that he's looking at. I have to go through and look at like an actual analysis of what he was talking about exactly there. But I know that like the Pfizer vaccine has been examined by like every country in the world that's using it. And if there was some huge conspiracy here where Pfizer lied about their data, I feel like another country would have shown that, but maybe not. But I know there are responses to this. The changing of an anti-vaxxer, going to Merriam-Webster and trying to say that this is what the vaccine definition is, that's very weird. That sounds like a Twitter talking point. Like, as a medical professional, you shouldn't really be concerned with what, like, how a dictionary defines something. Like, are we going to give this guy a vaccine? I'm not sure if this is a vaccine. Let me check Merriam-Webster real quick. That's kind of a weird, unless he's just saying that, like, it's crazy the definitions have changed over time in dictionaries, but that's not surprising at all. For instance, if you look up the definition of literally in a dictionary, now it will say literally can also mean figuratively, because that's how we use it so much. Saying that these mRNA products are different than other vaccines, I guess, is kind of true, but there are non-mRNA vaccines for the coronavirus as well. There are the traditionally tuned vector or adenovirus, whatever bullshit ones. The AstraZeneca, the Johnson & Johnson one, like these things exist too. Yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like kind of a weird thing. But I know that there was a write-up that a doctor responded to this point by point. Jeffrey Morris did a write-up of this, but I haven't read it yet, where he goes through every point that this guy made, and then he responds, and he's a doctor, and so his response is probably going to be better than mine. But yeah, I don't know. It seemed like a weird. It's a lot of weird points brought up.
Fair enough. I don't want to go back and forth on maybe any of the points, but it was it was nice to see a reaction.
Well, wait. This is like a 5-minute read. Can I read this real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'll just read real quick. I'm curious. So this guy is Jeffrey Morris, refuting Peter Doshi's claims, doubting the trustworthiness and meaningfulness of COVID vaccine results. Peter Doshi has written a piece in the opinion section for the British Medical Journal, for which he is an associate editor, questioning the trustworthiness and meaningfulness of the published study results for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. In it, he implies a lack of transparency in the analyses and suggesting the vaccine efficacy would be more like 19 to 29% based on something he argues may be a more meaningful clinical endpoint than the primary endpoint corresponding to the 95% efficacy estimate reported in the FDA report and the New England Journal of Medicine paper. His report implies that the pharmaceutical companies are misrepresenting the results in a way that exaggerates their efficacy and safety, and that this misrepresentation has not been caught by the FDA or the NEJM peer review. His opinion piece is the most highly read at BMJ, a highly respected medical journal, and is also being highly cited by anti-vaccine groups all over the internet. If his claims are accurate, then this could be a great service to science to raise legitimate questions and correct the public's perception of the demonstrated efficacy of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. But if his claims are not accurate, this piece does a great disservice to the scientific community and world as we struggle to get control of this pandemic. The Pfizer-BioNTech phase 3 study appears to be well designed, being a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial with clearly pre-specified dose, schedule, and endpoint, and its results appear to be better than anyone dared hoped, with a 95% efficacy far exceeding the 50% threshold for FDA approval, and an adverse event profile that appeared positive with transient fever, fatigue, headache, and arm soreness among the few that differ from placebo. While there are questions remaining about the durability of immunity, the degree of protection against asymptomatic disease or transmission, and long-term safety endpoints, these results surpassed expectations and appeared extremely promising. Is it possible that these results are not what they appear? Let's investigate Doshi's claims. So number one, the FDA report reveals that not all COVID-19 cases counted in primary efficacy analysis. The crux of his argument is based on a section in the FDA report entitled Suspected COVID-19 Cases that he portrays as evidence that the vast majority of true COVID-19 cases were omitted from the primary analysis to inflate efficacy estimates, and that if all true COVID-19 cases were included, the efficacy would be much lower. I'm guessing this is where his picture comes from. He presents this as some sort of gotcha moment, but looking at the documents, it is clear that he's either misunderstanding or misrepresenting the trial and its results. First, let's see this section in the FDA report upon which he builds his claims, which consists of 2 paragraphs at the top of page 42. The first paragraph starts with the sentence, as specified in the protocol, suspected cases of symptomatic COVID-19 that were not PCR confirmed were not recorded as adverse events unless they met regulatory criteria for seriousness, and then goes into the details of the 2 suspected cases in the trial that met the regulatory criteria for seriousness. The second paragraph goes on to discuss the total number of suspected cases of symptomatic COVID-19, and since it is the springboard for Doshi's argument, here I will copy the entire paragraph. I'm just going to read like 2 or 3 more of these, and I won't go through the whole thing, but just in this section. Among 3,410 total cases of suspected but unconfirmed COVID-19 in the overall study population, 1,594 occurred in the vaccine group versus 1,816 in the placebo group. Suspected COVID-19 cases that occurred within 7 days after any vaccination were 409 in the vaccine group versus 287 in the placebo group. It is possible that the imbalance in suspected COVID-19 cases occurring in the 7-day post-vaccination represents vaccine reactogenicity genicity with symptoms that overlap with those of COVID-19. Overall, though, these data do not raise a concern that protocol-specified reporting of suspected but unconfirmed COVID-19 cases could have masked clinically significant adverse events that would not have otherwise been detected. Doshi argues that these 3,410 cases of suspected but unconfirmed COVID-19 should have been included in the primary efficacy analysis, suggesting a better choice for the efficacy endpoint may have been a comparison of the total confirmed plus suspected COVID-19 cases between the vaccine and placebo arms, which would have led to a much lower efficacy estimate. The 95% efficacy measures came from the fact that all the confirmed symptomatic COVID-19 cases in the study, 162 were in the placebo arm and just 8 in the vaccine arm, suggesting 162 divided by 8, or 162 minus 8 divided by 162 equals 95% of the cases that would have occurred sans vaccines were prevented by the vaccine. He argues that these suspected but unconfirmed cases should also be included, which would have basically created a bunch more cases in the vaccine group and in the placebo arm, which would result in a far lower efficacy, 19%, far below the FDA bar. Or if leaving out the 409 in the vaccine group and 287 in the placebo group that were within 1 week of the shot and might be side effects of the vaccine, then it would have been, again, way more cases, which would have caused an efficacy of only 29%. He puts these forward as more valid efficacy measures than measures. Pfizer's 92-page report didn't mention the 3,410 suspected COVID-19 cases, nor did its publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, nor did any of the reports on Moderna's vaccine, implying these numbers were purposefully left out of all the reports, perhaps with malicious intent, presenting this as a gotcha result and implying the exceptionally strong 95% efficacy results for Pfizer and Moderna are mirage created by suppressing legitimate COVID-19 case counts. So it seems like he digs through the study and he says that there are some people that should have been included that weren't because they were unconfirmed cases. There's more to this to read, but I guess I'll link you to this if you want to see like a refute, I guess, of this.
Yeah, that was very interesting, and I have no idea who's right. I have fucking no idea.
Sure, but I'm willing to bet that you're probably going to lean more into the first guy because it seems like he agrees with what you're saying than the refutation provided by this guy.
That's not why I would lean more into it. But my kind of like priors, if you want to talk from a Bayesian perspective, would be that there's a large amount of corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. So it would fit that they would also be corrupt whilst hiding these data, which they are, if it were in their financial motives. Yeah,
but don't you think if there is a lot of potential corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, but like, wouldn't there be so many wouldn't other pharmaceuticals be incentivized to discover this, or other countries or other academic institutions, and not just like single renegade doctors?
Most of the big pharmaceutical companies are funded by the same people. But
wait, what do you mean by that?
By Vanguard and BlackRock, the main investors in Pfizer, AstraZeneca. Moderna.
Vanguard and BlackRock, these are all majority owners in these. What is like the percentage of ownership that Vanguard has? Vanguard ownership.
This is getting out of my wheelhouse, but from my
but that's a really important claim, because you're essentially saying that some large equity firms or some large hedge funds or investors are making decisions for these companies to collude with all of them, like.
If they're the shareholders, then obviously they're going to be helping make decisions at least.
But do you think that Vanguard and BlackRock, you're saying that they have positions on these boards where aren't all of these decisions made publicly? Like if you own shares in these companies, there's going to be notes for meetings and voting decisions that are sent out to everybody. Like if people from Vanguard and BlackRock were saying you need to do this or we need to stop fighting with each other, like that seems to undermine everything I know about how stock ownership or everything works.
Yeah, it would be some like grand conspiracy stuff. So I'm not expecting anyone to just fucking instantly switch their opinion on it. But I mean, I wouldn't be expert enough to be able to make an argument in either case. I've listened to a lot of arguments, and the conclusion that I can say that I feel pretty damn certain about is that there is a huge precedent in corruption within the pharmaceutical industry where they've lied about their products, they've cherry-picked data, and they've hidden adverse side effects, and then had to pay billions of dollars in fines for the criminal acts that they committed, and still made a ton of money, and nobody went to prison. So I don't think it's a secret that these pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Merck, they have a huge criminal record, and they seem to be some of, if not the most corrupt companies.
I guess it's possible. I don't know if any of that is true. Like looking up, so BlackRock and Pfizer together own like 16% of Pfizer, and I don't even know if that's direct ownership, like the companies own the stocks, or if that's just like managing other people's shares through like ETFs and stuff. I think that we would have to draw more strong lines of like them influencing the decisions of the companies rather than just saying that, like, yeah, right.
This is a whole new conversation that would take hours to say, and I'm going to say, don't listen to me. Anybody that's listening to me now, perhaps go and look it up yourself, but don't listen to me about what's true and what's not, because I do not understand the intricacies of how these companies are run. I've heard arguments that say that there's a monopoly that's kind of masquerading as corporate competitivenness, but I don't know anything about it.
Sure, I'm just saying that we have to be careful because, like, a passive asset manager like Vanguard and BlackRock, which is my understanding is what they are. Maybe they have investment groups of their own. There might be like a Vanguard investment group that's different, but a lot of these people are just managing other people's assets. Even if that company owns outwardly, like 8% of a company, like they're managing assets from their clients. They're not like going to those companies and telling them how to perform, right? I own a lot of VOO from Vanguard. So I might be part of that 8% that's managing Pfizer or whatever. But something that I said at the very beginning of this, I think is really important. I think that in the beginning of the conversation, we wanted to get away from arguing the minutia, but here I'm going to introduce these two terms. Have you ever heard the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument?
No.
So a valid argument, I believe that all of our brains can follow this. A valid argument is one in which the premises, if true, like logically lead to the conclusion. And a sound argument is one in which the argument is valid and the premises are true. So I might say, like, premise 1 is all men are immortal. Premise 2 is Socrates is a man. And the conclusion would be Socrates is therefore immortal. Now, validly, that argument works. It's a valid argument because the conclusion follows from the premises.
I get it.
Yeah, but it's not sound because all men aren't immortal.
The presupposition.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that you and I think that you're like a reasonable person. You seem like a reasonable person from everything I've heard. I think that we're probably going to have the exact same conclusion given the same sets of data. But in actuality, what's causing us to come to different conclusions is we see different data. And you've alluded to this a few times. You're like, we see different media reports, we see different things. So I think that's what makes these conversations so difficult, is that we agree largely in that we're both reasonable people, but we see way different data that drives us towards different conclusions. And I think that's like the complicated part about getting to these types of arguments.
Yeah, I think it's the complicated part of being human, that we all have to experience the world through different lenses, and that means we all get different input, which means that we're going to have different rational output, even if everyone were logically infallible.
Sure.
But let's take it away from that, because I really want to stray away from kind of the conspiratorial side of things that aren't public knowledge, because I do believe there's a lot happening in the back that people aren't aware of, a lot of kind of under the table deals. But what we are publicly aware of is the absolute corruption of these pharmaceutical companies. And
well, like how? Or what do you mean by that?
So, for instance, if you look up the lawsuits of how Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson or Merck have been sued or gone through litigation of their different products that have been brought into market, there are very, very public records where they've had to pay hundreds of millions or billions of dollars because they've intentionally hidden how dangerous their products are. This is absolutely true. Publicly.
Sure. So, like, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. But then the question is going to be, like, is this an exceptional level of fraud, or is this just kind of like businesses working as usual? And, sometimes you get caught.
Deaths of hundreds of thousands of people for the sake of profits.
Yeah, sure. But here's something theoretically that might be true, right? It might be the case that a car company in the past has decided that they could cut corners through implementing some safety measure, and they thought, okay, well, it's cheaper to make it. We can sell our cars cheaper. This is good. And then eventually, does the EPA regulate car safety? I don't know. Whoever does like car safety realizes, like, hey, one sec, this is bullshit. And then it's like, oh, fuck. Okay, well, yeah, we shouldn't have done this. We got sued or whatever. But does that mean, like, I'm not going to trust Ford to ever make a car again because they cut corners in some place and they had to settle lawsuit? Like, probably not. Like, I'm sure the companies lie and cheat and fuck up. That's why we have regulatory bodies to check them sometimes,
Yeah, so agreed to some extent. I do believe that trust ought to be earned, and I believe that the public record that these companies have shown, and these are only the times that they've been caught publicly and they've lost in court, And it's pretty widely known within the industry that this is part of their business model, that they take into account how much they might lose if they were to lose something, if they were to lose, if they were to get sued in court. But they're still able to make profit. Nobody goes to jail. They are, from what I can see, perhaps the most corrupt conglomerates.
Why would we say they're more corrupt than like fossil fuels or like any other big? It feels like every huge organization or conglomerate of organizations is probably incentivized to cut the corners as much as possible, right? Even on individuals, not that I would ever do this, but I've heard crazy stories that people sometimes might exaggerate or under report some things on their taxes, maybe to cut corners a little bit, right? Like, why would we assume that pharmaceuticals are unique in this case rather than like they're exceptionally horrible or evil?
Yeah, I guess if you were to argue intent, then perhaps it might be more of an equal playing field. But if you were to argue outcome, then perhaps they might be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because they are playing with the health of people. They're making decisions purely based on profit that they know will be leading to the heart attacks or deaths or strokes of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Can we trust, and I want to go on a little rant here, can we trust these companies to then be telling the truth whilst they're hiding these data from these vaccines? Can we trust these companies to be telling the truth to us now? Can we at least have some questions about how trustworthy they are? And the one thing that I really feel strongly is that we have this beautiful technology of vaccines. It is perhaps the best technology the world has ever created. But we, for some reason, put the production and the distribution in the hands, in a centralized way, in the hands of the people who are most corrupt in this world. And I think that is fucking insanity. I think it's insanity that we don't order them to give the blueprints of the vaccines to different companies to look at, that they don't have complete public transparency. And I think it is an obvious show of corruption that these phenomena are kept so under the table and so hidden.
Well, I mean, like the problem, so the first thing you said is, can we trust these companies to tell us the truth? And the answer is absolutely fucking not. But that's why we make them publish studies on all the shit we do. You'd never take a drug and just say like, oh yeah, I'm sure these guys are being honest. No, of course not. That would be a horrible idea. But this is why they have to publish their studies. This is why they have to jump through the hoops in the FDA. This is why they have to do what they do in order to prove the efficacy of whatever medication or therapy they're trying to sell the public, which I think is fair.
Let's maybe hop on that point for a second. I mean,
sure.
If you can maybe remember the other ones you're going to make. So who do you think collects these data, and who do you think analyzes these data?
So the companies themselves are probably in charge of, I would imagine, I think the companies themselves are responsible for managing their own trials, and then they're supposed to submit those trials to public medical journals, and then their peer review board, whatever doctors or scientists sit on those boards, will go through and make sure that the data is done in a responsible manner. And then once they're published, other people should be invited to repeat those experiments in similar ways with the medications to see if the results all coincide with one another. That's my understanding of how the peer review process and the scientific process is supposed to work from start to finish.
So I don't think that the last statement is true in the case of pharmaceutical products. I don't think that there are other companies that have to make these studies. Secondly,
or what do you mean by that? Just so we're clear.
So the studies that are created to get these get these products to market are conducted by the companies themselves.
Yeah, they are. But I'm saying that once it's published, other people can look into it. You don't need other people to look into it for FDA approval, but once they're published, other companies can look into it. Yeah.
They can look into it, but these data have been produced by the company themselves.
Sure.
And now we have a third or ostensibly third-party system like the FDA that's meant to approve or disapprove these drugs. Now, what if there is some cross-contamination, and this is actually very, very publicly spoken about by people who are very critical of the pharmaceutical industrial complex. What if there's some cross-pollination from people who are working within these pharmaceutical companies on boards, also moving over or being part of the chairs of the CDC or the people who are meant to be, say, guarding the chicken coop?
It wouldn't surprise me if people that worked in pharmaceuticals also went on to work like for the CDC or something. That wouldn't be surprising at all. Now, if a conflict of interest like currently exists, you've got like a guy that owns like 5% of Pfizer is like the sole guy deciding whether or not a drug is approved. That's probably not a good thing. But I mean, like these government bodies, oftentimes the people making decisions, it's not just one person. There's going to be bodies of people that are hopefully appointed by elected politicians that are making decisions. Hopefully there are multiple points checks and balances across the system. So if the pharmaceutical company lies about their data, hopefully either somebody from the company leaks it or we figure it out, or if not, hopefully the FDA catches it. Let's say that a pharmaceutical company lies about their data and the FDA gets it, and let's say there are multiple compromised parties in the FDA, and then they fudge it up. If it was the case that something got far that passed, then hopefully at that point, other people that are looking at the drug and starting to do studies on it, so if not in our country, let's say our whole country's compromised, other countries and other academic institutions might start looking into it as well. At some point, unless it's a worldwide conspiracy, somebody should catch on that something bad is happening.
Exactly, and by then tens of thousands of people are dead, which has happened multiple times.
Yeah, but the difference is intentionality, right? Like there was a drug for it's not formaldehyde. That's what they use to preserve dead things. There was a drug that the EMI approved in Europe that wasn't approved by the FDA in the United States that ended up causing women to give birth to like deformed formaldehyde or thalidomide. Yeah, that was a big deal because the FDA noted, Europe approved it, and then a lot of women had problems with it. But there's a big difference between saying like something was approved that shouldn't have because of either the trials weren't done right or whatever, versus there's like when I say conspiracy, I don't mean like conspiracy theory, but there was like an organized, constructed plot to make it so that something happened. That's a way, way, way heavier claim, I think, than just there was a shoddy, research process or something.
Yeah. So I believe. I'm pretty certain on this. The courts concluded that there were grand, let's call it a conspiracy to hide the side effects of specific drugs and bring them to market.
Which one? I'm not trying to push you on but I'll read this later. Like, what do you know? Like a drug where that happened, or like
there was actually you might hate to hear this. There was actually a guy on Joe Rogan. He was very pro-vaccine, but he was very anti-pharmaceutical company. He laid out really well. There's also a book called Lost Connections that speaks about this really nicely. There's a lot of people that are very critical of the pharmaceutical industrial complex, but it seems to be pretty common knowledge that for a large amount of people who are, a mixture between pro and anti-vaccine, et cetera, the whole system is corrupt to the core. And
but that's boring. I'm not like for the whole system. I want to know, like, is there like a specific case where like here was a vaccine and we can see that this was like done in a corrupt manner and there was like an intentional hiding of the things and like a big pharmaceutical company. So I'm just curious. I
believe the courts have concluded, not for vaccines specifically, because vaccines they don't have any legal liability since 1996 or something. But there are other drugs that were concluded that is the case.
Okay, I'll look up later to see if I can find any of that, because that would be an interesting thing if that was the case.
Yeah, and again, not to try and push on the minutiae, because neither of us understands the intricacies of how these phenomena work, but if that were the case, would you then perhaps have some more questions about the pharmaceutical companies in general, and perhaps would you empathize more about people that are very skeptical about the intentions of the pharmaceutical companies if there is precedent for them to lie, hide data, and cherry pick data and cherry pick clinical trials?
Well, that precedent is always going to be there, of course. Like I would say, yeah, of course. You never trust a private firm to act in an ethical manner. You're hoping that what's going to hold them accountable is either third-party regulatory bodies, say like the FDA, or if they fuck up, the courts and the markets later on when their companies go bankrupt because they create a bad drug or they get sued out of existence, depending on what happened. You never ever trust a private firm in and of itself, because their responsibility at the end of the day is to deliver profits to shareholders. I don't expect them to be looking out for my best interest. I want the responsibility to come from the third-party regulatory bodies that are supposed to be looking over what they're doing. That's who I would hope to trust.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we can kind of deconstruct the whole corporate system and place some non-profits or something like that. But I don't know enough about that to be able to say it certainly. But what I would like to say is that if this does happen to be the case, could you then be more critical from your personal point of view of these pharmaceutical companies, and perhaps be more skeptical along with the people who are very skeptical about these specific jabs, about why they're hiding, for instance, their raw data, why they wanted to wait 75 years before they gave it to the public?
I don't know if that's the case.
That's the case. Yeah, they wanted to wait 75 years and the court ruled against it. Pfizer, this was.
Sure, but then if the court ruled against it, then it seems like we did get the data, right?
Not yet. We're still waiting on it. I don't know exactly where they are with it.
Well, how is this one doctor able to say that they should have included people that they shouldn't have if they were hiding all of the original data?
Wait, say it all again.
The doctor that you showed me, the guy publishing shit at whatever Twitter video you showed me, he was saying like, well, here are these like 6,000 patients that they should have included, but they didn't. How would he even know that if they had kept all of their data private?
So they made the results of the clinical trials public, but they kept the raw data private.
Sure, which I think is usually common, but why wouldn't they have just completely hidden all of that? If they, let's say these pharmaceuticals were corrupt, why wouldn't they just like not report at all that there were some people that they couldn't confirm the cases? Why wouldn't they just hide that data if they're just going to lie about everything else?
Yeah, I have no idea. This is an incomplete data set that I wouldn't be able to hypothesize without just getting into the weeds of guessing. But
sure. Do you see the problem? But like a lot of our conversation topics here are kind of relying on that in the weeds explanation. That seems like
No. I completely understand. This is why I'm saying I don't expect you to change your mind on this, because it would probably be irrational given the set of presuppositions that you have. But given the set of presuppositions that I have, that these pharmaceutical companies are deadly corrupt, that are willing to put the lives of tens of thousands of people at risk, or just killing them for profits, and now they're being very, very fucking shady with the current data that they have, and have no fucking legal liability for any of these phenomena, for any of the side effects that happen through their vaccines. Can you at least perhaps adjust your worldview slightly, if that presupposition is true, that they have been that shady in the past, to say maybe we do need to turn more of a critical eye towards Pfizer, but towards Moderna, etc.
Yeah, so no. So this is why I'm so firstly, my understanding is that it's very rare that you ever publish the exact data sets publicly. I don't know if those are turned over to the journals themselves.
No. In other scientific, I've seen a bunch of studies that they publish the raw data.
I'm just going to say no. It's just not how it works. It's very common practice in a lot of data that you won't publish like the raw data sets themselves. Some people do, but I think it's pretty common that they don't. You can ask other researchers or whatever, but they don't. I've read like a ton of like econ literature and stuff. You don't.
A lot of studies in the last couple of years, and I've seen a lot of raw data.
Okay. I mean, you can Google, like, do studies always publish raw data sets? They just don't. Especially clinical data. A lot of that can be publicly... What?
I'm not saying they always do. I'm just saying. Like,
sure. I mean, we can think even for HIPAA reasons why you can't publish medical data, right? You would have to like go through processes to anonymize all of it, make sure like, but regardless, I mean, you can look into that later if you want, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. I've read a lot of econ studies. They don't publish like raw data all the time. It's just not, doesn't happen all the time.
The thing is that they are saying that they're going to publish it. They just said they're going to wait 75 years until it's complete. They wanted to do fucking 500 pages at the time, and then the court ruled that's not going to happen.
There's a reason why for this, but I would have to read this article for why.
The reason that they gave is that it just takes a long time with administration, that they can only do 500 pages at a time. But I've heard from a lot of different people that's just complete bullshit.
To meet the plaintiff's proposed FOIA deadline, the FDA would have to process a daunting 80,000 pages a month. But the plaintiffs know that the FDA has 18,000 employees and a budget of $6 billion and has itself said that there is nothing more important than the licensure of this vaccine and being transparent about this vaccine. Is that true? They would have to publish 80,000 pages a month to satisfy this FOIA request?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, so, I mean, it seems like there's a little bit more to this thing. I'll look into more. I'll throw you this link and then I'll read it later, I guess, if I'm interested. But regardless, backing up a little bit, I think that focusing on whether or not we can trust the pharmaceuticals, I think that's the wrong question. Because I'm a big capitalist and a proponent of capitalism. You never trust... What?
Me too.
Oh, yeah. But we never, ever trust private firms, to be honest. We just don't. You don't. This is like the whole, like, you just don't do this. This is why we have third-party regulatory. Otherwise, the FDA, the EPA, the FAA, none of these things would exist, because why would they? Like, we would trust private companies, right? So the goal is whether or not we can trust the FDA or the CDC. Those are the important questions.
You also just have to look at the behaviors of different corporations. Like, there are a bunch of corporations, for instance, Black Sheep Coffee within the UK. I know the CEO. I know he's a good person. I know that he would never try and fuck over people for the sake of profits. Like, there is differentials from an individual's perspective. Obviously, we put safeguards in place. We regulate, but from an individualized perspective, we have to assess the data. We have to assess what we've seen with our own eyes and say how much do we trust these companies.
Yeah, but individually, that doesn't matter. Like, let's say that you know the guy and you trust that guy, but let's say that his company grows bigger and he starts getting a bunch of external investment. Like, you don't know at some point if somebody's going to be making different decisions, or you don't know if you could trust that company, right?
there's more data, so we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
But right now, I don't trust it.
So when it comes to like pharmaceutical companies, these things are huge entities, right? There's not going to be one person we can either trust or not trust. I would just say my default is always I would never trust a company. I would hope that there are external measures holding them accountable, because unless it's like a small business like Uncle Joe's gas station or some guy that I know down the street, right?
Yeah. Generally agree there. So why were you saying it's the wrong decision to ask the question if
we should trust the companies? Yeah, so we should be asking our regulatory bodies functioning. I think that's the important, because our institutions ideally are what's protecting us there over the companies themselves.
A lot of the scientists, in fact, one of the main crux of the arguments that the scientists on this side of the aisle are making is that these corporations and their regulatory bodies are captured.
Yep. Which is the important, but then the whole conversation is going to become like a de facto, like into the weeds argument on like, well, where is the conspiracy? How do we figure out like who's compromised? Like you would have to go there, I guess, right?
Yeah, and that's where loads of people have gone and kind of, in my opinion, shown very convincing arguments of that there is regulatory capture to a large extent.
Sure, but then yeah, I mean, I would argue the opposite, of course, right? But that's kind of where we get hung up on.
It sounds like you haven't looked at it too much.
I absolutely have looked at it a ton. You keep saying that I haven't looked at it too much, but I will say that every time you're citing me an example of something, it's usually like, this is a Joe Rogan talk I saw, or this is like a video on Twitter or whatever, and you don't seem to be familiar with any of the responses or any of the underlying like assertions that people are making on the other end. Maybe you have looked at them and you just haven't represented them well, but like I feel if you ask me to explain like any side of this argument, I feel like I can give both sides of it pretty well, but I feel like when I listen to you, I feel like you're very heavily inundated with one side's worth of information.
No, I'm going to fight you, Destiny. That's not true. I'm not here to trade. I mean, I've looked at both sides of the argument to an extraordinary amount, to an unhealthy amount. But I've been making arguments on this side, and you've been making arguments on that side. It's a two-sided debate where I want to prove my side to be rational, you want to prove your side to be rational, and we want to try and learn where the disagreements are. But I've definitely looked into a lot of the rebuttal to the things that I'm saying, and I've come to the conclusions that this side seems to have, on average, better arguments. But I'm not saying it with certainty, because some of the rebuttals are legit, and even if they're not, that doesn't mean that the people that I've heard are right.
Okay. Well, what else? Is there anything else you want to go here? Or?
I guess. All right, let me meditate for a second. Sorry, after you.
So there are people. So obviously, tribalistic. My fan base wants me to fight a lot more with you. Whatever. So some people are posting this. I think that the way that we view, and this might be true of different sides of this argument, I think that the way that we view gathering truth or figuring out what's real or not real, I think that the differences there might extrapolate a lot to our differences in these more abstract, these seventh level removed topics. So I've heard people say in my chat, I don't know, I'm not going to quote your position at you, but I've heard people say in my chat, they're claiming that like you believe that like math is a bad foundation for poker or something, or that you're more of like, you think that intuitive playing is more important. What do you mean when you say that? Or do you want to expand on that? I'm curious.
Yeah,
because you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier.
I don't think math is a bad foundation for poker. Mm-hmm. Before I was a poker player, I was looking to get into either theoretical physics or banking. I was math through and through and through. It's kind of the way that I view the world is often through the mathematical lens. Mm-hmm. The argument that I make, not to get too much into the nuances of poker, is that there's a kind of delusion that's spread around the poker world that obsesses around the game theory optimal approach of poker. Okay. That they teach new students how to learn poker through the game theoretical approach, and it quashes and quells creativity, and it doesn't teach people how to think. It teaches people what to think. And my argument in the poker world is that people put way too much emphasis on this game theory optimal style of thinking, and that there are actual multiple different ways that you can play poker very successfully, and I've shown that by winning a fuck ton of money in the high stakes that I can find.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Whoever's saying that, much love to them. They just don't understand.
Tell them to fuck off. Gotcha. Okay. The only reason why I wondered that more was because earlier you mentioned something about intuitions guiding you for poker. And I wondered when you said that if you're one of those people like, oh no, fuck the math, don't worry about that. But then my challenge was going to be that like, maybe it might be that you're lucky and that you just happen to have really good intuitions that line up with math. But there are a lot of people that have really bad intuitions, and especially in poker, this is the case, right? You remember every single, 1 outer or 2 outer you hit on the river, but you forget like certain wins, you forget certain losses. Like people have like huge biases in terms of what they remember. This is why gambling like sucks so many people in. They remember their wins more than their losses and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's right. But the way that I see intuition is that it has to be working in duality with intellect. Like I always imagine it as a tree. Like the intellect is the roots and the intuition is the branches. The intuition can reach further than the intellect. It can bring back knowledge that perhaps the intellect can't quite fathom. It brings back images and poetry and art. It just understands it without being able to articulate it. But if you spend all of your time in the intuition without being able to rationally ground yourself, then you just turn into an airy-fairy hippie singing Kumbaya around a circle and telling me that this magic beat is going to make me feel better. Okay. If you spend too much time just in the rational and you don't spend time cultivating the intuition, you become too narrow-minded. You don't find the external data. You only look in a very, very small sphere of the world. So I believe that to be successful at poker, and the way that I'm successful at poker and the way that I teach my students, is that you need to cultivate your intuition through meditation, through eating healthy, through whatever data sets you can accumulate over time. And then you also have to cultivate the rational side of poker, and you have to learn the theory.
Okay, I don't think I disagree with that at all. My background is more in music, and some people will argue like, oh, music theory is a waste of time, it stifles your creativity, but the proper response is always that like these two tools are complementary of one another. Theoretical understandings can explain what you can intuitively feel, and then maybe you can intuitively build on those data explanations, but they kind of go hand in hand, and one without the other is kind of wasted, and people that get too dug into one and demonize the other are usually missing the bigger picture kind of.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Okay. Well, anything else?
Give me a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Speak to chat.
It's later for you than me, so.
Yeah, I'm getting sleepy. I guess the one thing we didn't quite dig into fully was lockdowns. Personally, from what I've seen, lockdowns are killing millions of people. And this is probably one of the data sets that we have disagreements on, but I mean, I actually have a lot of articles and studies that I can show you now. For instance,
I thought like suicides and stuff had gone down for over the lockdown periods, no?
So there are definitely deaths that would have happened in first worlds that wouldn't have happened otherwise if not lockdowns. But I'm more talking about the third world countries that have they've had their economies collapsed by the worldwide lockdowns. And so it's estimated something by the end of August 2021, 150 million people were pushed into extreme poverty, and like 250,000 infants. I think infants was described from 0 to 1, but someone can fact check me on that. Had died from starvation, and millions of other people that had been pushed towards starvation or died from starvation. And then there's like an extra, I think, million people that didn't get their tuberculosis. Which led to the tuberculosis treatment, which led to hundreds of thousands of people dying of tuberculosis. A lot smaller vaccination uptake across the world because they didn't have as much funding for the healthcare systems, and there's just a ton of other repercussions that happen when you shut down countries that have led to the horrible consequences, especially in places like Kenya and Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
How do we know how much of this was due to just lockdowns and not the vaccines, not the disease itself?
Because it happened in countries where people just carried on doing whatever the fuck they wanted. For instance, in Nigeria, or if you look at, countries that couldn't afford to lock down because if you don't work, you die because everyone's living hand to mouth, then their economies collapsed and people were dying by the droves.
I guess I don't know anything about. I just don't know. I haven't looked at like third world countries, I guess, as much, so I can't really say. But wait, so you're saying these people died for what reason?
The economy collapsed, and the supply chains collapsed, or the charitable sector was decimated, so they couldn't get as much help. Their medical systems collapsed, or the foreign aid budget collapsed because our GDP is correlated to that.
But how do we know? I guess So how do we know that this is a result of lockdowns and not just people getting sick?
What do you mean, people getting sick? How would people getting sick cause it?
Well, because if people are sick, they're not working, right? It's like my understanding is that like in the United States today, there are a lot of like schools and offices where like half the people are out right now because they're sick. Wasn't it the case that like a lot of production around the world got a little bit slowed because there were a lot of people getting sick, so you had like shortages of labor and everything? I don't know what the numbers on this are, but what?
No, I'm pretty sure that's not the case.
You're pretty sure that there aren't like a fuck ton of people that are out from work and school today because they're sick, or that it hasn't happened? Like
No. Definitely the case that a lot of people are staying home because they're sick, and definitely near the beginning of the pandemic. But if you were to compare the destruction caused by the lockdowns and people not being able to go to work and the economy crashing around in comparison to the economy crashing from people being sick, from what I've read, which is a lot of fucking articles and a lot of epidemiologists on both sides of the argument saying this, it's incomparable.
I would be curious in seeing any of those studies that aren't preprints, but that are actually published and peer-reviewed, because my understanding is that people getting sick and the people who are scared of getting sick have actually had a pretty big impact. The biggest example that I can think of is for the Scandinavian countries, Sweden didn't really enact any measures for the coronavirus, but the other Scandinavian countries did. They fared better when it came to deaths, and Sweden fared a bit better when it came to economic activity, but their economy still suffered.
Yeah, because the economies of all the other countries are interwoven with it. So
sure, but again, like how much are people, because of people getting sick, are also not working in these jobs as well? Like, so you have people that'll stay home and then like the job suffer as a result of that.
The job loss in Sweden was a lot less than other countries. A lot less.
I don't know if it was a lot less, but I also know that a lot more people died in Sweden from the virus itself too. So I mean, like they're trade-offs. But I guess coming into the numbers, I would have to, if you have any, yeah, you can shoot me like a study later and I'll read it. I'm curious, I guess.
Yeah, and I would, if you want to speak off streaming and not just saying that, I would love to share the studies, and then we could actually go into it and dig deep into some minutiae. But you know, it's something that off the top of my head, it would take fucking hours to just look into it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be fun if you want ever to.
Fair enough. Okay, I guess to summarize, it was surprisingly nice to find that we agreed on so much. I am pretty, I'm going to use the word horrified, but not in horrified at you, but just horrified by the concept that there isn't a line in the sand of totalitarianism that you would say, okay, if people are going to get rounded up and put into quarantine camps in Australia or Austria or even in the US, then you wouldn't say this is too far. Apart from that, I really, really like how you think about these things. I feel like I've learned a lot about how, people on the other side of the argument have felt, and you've definitely brought me ideas that I've not completely thought through. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation. It's been fun. If you ever want to chat again, you can always just poke me and let me know.
Cool. All right. Much love, brother.
Okay. Have fun. Peace out.